Dr. Irvin, economist and financial consultant Dr. Thomson Fontaine, and former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphine. Hopefully, we might be joined later on. Attorney Gabriel Christian might pop in to put in a few words a bit later on in the program. But it is Tuesday, the 8th of March, 2022, just about 7:35 p.m. in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook at Q95 FM Radio. Please share the live. Invite your friends to join the Q family. Get the latest breaking local, regional, and international news and happenings. And so we want to really acknowledge you on the other online streaming platforms. The Black History Month has just been very well reorganized and recognized and celebrated on the Global View on Q and on Q95, of course. Now the historic series on the evolution of Dominica's political leaders continues. Former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphine, Prime Minister James Eugenia Charles, the Mary Eugenia Charles. That's what we're going to be dealing with next. And thereafter, we will focus on the eras of former Prime Ministers Edison Chenfield James, Roosevelt Douglas Pierre Charles, and our current Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt. We will be discussing their lives, their legacies, and their leadership. Tonight, our distinguished guests will focus on former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphine and Prime Minister Dame Eugenia Charles as we continue to take an in-depth, intimate, comparative look at Dominica's political leaders over the years. So please stay tuned to Q95, the big station, the continuation of our series on the lives, leadership, and legacies of Dominica's political leaders. My distinguished guests will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and as usual, the dangerous, with inputs from our callers, families, and friends. The continuation of our series on the guests to discuss the good, the bad, somebody has the ugly, and as usual, the dangerous, with inputs from our callers, families, and friends. Mike, so please continue our series on the guests to discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and as usual, the dangerous, with inputs from our callers, families, and friends. No qualification, divisiveness, just bring back ability, sharing society, good governance, peace, no calling out the brothers and sisters, of Dominica at home. I really hope that whoever has their mic open will turn off the mic because we're getting some feedback coming right back on you. So please, whoever has a mic open, whether it's in the studio, would you please turn off whatever is on? If it's you, I don't know, whoever it is, please turn off. So thank you very much. That's a lot better. But before we get into all of this tonight, into the life and leadership and legacies of former Prime Ministers Roger Seraphine and former Prime Minister Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, I will be asking our esteemed panelists for their comments and their views as regards the latest developments that we have been hearing about, as regards the possible fate of the current CBI program with respect to what the US government may be proposing to do. I believe there is a bipartisan effort in that regard, and which has already been done, in fact, by the EU governments and the UK government. I believe if what we anticipate could become a reality, we all should be afraid that Dominica will have to tighten its belt and move in a new direction. And in my opinion, the country would not have a chance of changing direction in any meaningful way within the current environment of victimization and divisiveness and hostility and intolerance of alternative views and ideas, and especially without the inputs and ideas and expertise of all our people at home and abroad who have been so far to some extent marginalized. If what I anticipate again takes place, only hope maybe to unify the country through some sort of government of national unity. We could not go on in any kind of divisiveness if this thing were to happen. This would be catastrophic for the economy, were this to happen in the way and as quickly as it appears it may be happening, so that way everyone can focus on working together to allow all ideas to contend and to act with one voice and with one mission to establish some kind of robust economy where the private sector can once again be the true engine of growth with a focus on export-led investments and growth, employment generation for Dominicans with agriculture, agribusiness, renewable energy and manufacturing, arts and cultural industries, among other things, as major economic pillars instead of depending on what we have been referring to as a mono passport economy. So, wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, please join this conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. Outstanding leaders that we highlighted during the Black History Month set the stage for the evolution of contemporary organizations like our Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation to continue to fight for freedom. And we hope that we'll begin to look seriously at organizations like this that could help in ensuring our democracy survives. So tonight, as we get going, a huge shout out, hugs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to, first of all, a gentleman called Herbert Suki Winston, who we honored last night as one of our national heroes, our ninth national hero on Q95. This honor was bestowed upon him by the Kudos to Our Heroes Committee. We were very happy to have him last night, and of course, even happier to have sitting by his side the person whom he refers to as the Chancellor of the Exchequer of Suki's Enterprises, the great Vicky Winston. And I also want to shout out to our frontline workers and healthcare providers. They're doing the best still to keep us safe from this dreaded coronavirus and its new variants. And they're often working under very difficult conditions. We know that. So please follow their advice, their guidelines, and protocols. Play it safe and stay alive. Later on in the program, Sherwin, as you know, is keeping us on the air, and Lambie Lewis will direct your calls to us. We'll be very happy to have your calls tonight, especially as it relates to what could happen if this passport thing falls apart in the way that some of these countries seem to be gearing up for it to do that. So let's get started. And I want to go first to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to get the conversation started on some of the challenges that it's now appear that we may be facing, and because of that CBI program. So, Dr. Andre, if you could open your mic and let's get going.
Yes, all right. Good evening to you, Mr. G. Good evening to our esteemed panelists, to Lambie. Good evening to all in all. Good evening to all the listeners. It is a difficult time that we are facing. And I think what we are facing in terms of the seal of Dominican passports can be summarized by a resort to Malcolm X's famous line after one of the American leaders was assassinated, quote, "The chickens are coming home to roost." That's what we're having. We're going to reap the sour harvest of our greed, the sour harvest of our selfishness, the sour harvest of the fact that rather than toil, rather than grow the economy, rather than spread industry and wealth and opportunities to Dominican citizens, we have taken the shortcut, what appears to be a shortcut to success. And we will reap the bitter harvest of that. The world is coming to the realization that one of the greatest threats to our democratic way of life is the sale of passports to nefarious individuals all over. Obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought to the fore this existential threat that we face. And all the great powers are in the business now of shutting down that pipeline to corruption, which has so severely undermined democracies, which has created obscene wealth in various places. Indeed, and let's be frank here, we have so-called Dominican passport sellers. And in your program, your previous program, Mr. G, I am told that some of the apostles of doom, some of the apostles of ill repute are suggesting that we don't sell passports. We just trade. Well, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing. But if I have to give them one piece of advice, I would say to them, those who have offices in Moscow or Lagos or other capitals of the world, you should pull down those signs, and instead you should put a sign saying, in the great words of one of our local Calypsonians, "Cocoa for sale, cocoa for sale, cocoa for sale." Because quite frankly, the stench of the sale of passports will not will not be so easily effaced or erased from the fabric or the visage of the facade of Dominica's economy or Dominican leadership. The fact of the matter is, the nothing has brought as much negative publicity, as much bad reputation as the sale of Dominican passports. Thomson Fontaine has done an excellent job in exposing those who, by sheer coincidence, according to the political directorate, have ended up with Dominican passports. It cannot be coincidence that it is in those sour spots of the world, those where people have things to hide, those who are fleeing justice. And let us remember a few years ago that there was a well known American ad saying, if you are a fugitive from US justice, guess where you can get a lifeline? The purchase of a Dominican passport. To the extent that is how low we've sunk. To the extent that is now the price, so that is what is now the emblem or symbol of Dominican citizenship. It means, quite frankly, that instead of progressing as a development nation, we've regressed. So here we are at a stage where the sale of those passports, money laundering, is now under international scrutiny. And I know that we've had some Russians in Dominica. Why are they here? Probably to grow Chedashin. I don't know. Probably to set up shell companies with the assistance of lawyers in Dominica who are involved, many of whom, or few of whom, are involved in every nefarious activity you can imagine. But the scrutiny, the torchlight of honesty and decency and integrity will be shone upon these folks, and many of them will be exposed, and many of them will find that the United States, historically, and will continue in the future, to have very little respect and very little tolerance of those who peddle or those who take advantage of their country's assets for their own personal good. So that is the bright line at the end of this dark cloud. Wasn't there a calypso called Karma? Karma coming, Karma coming, Karma coming. Mr. G, probably you can have Blue Blue sing that song for you on your program.
I'm pretty sure she'd
You
be
know,
happy to sing it. She loves that song.
yes, she's a soprano in her own right. But on a very serious note, this is serious business. We will reap the fruit of our greed and of our corruption. And sadly, there are many innocent persons who will suffer for that scrutiny. But this is my opening comment.
Yes, and thank you for that. I think it is really very concerning because I remember some time ago when I first saw that the EU was taking a similar action, and I said, "Wait a minute, this is a wake-up call here." And then I saw that the UK took the similar action. I said, "Wait a minute, this thing is getting serious." And now the US, and I believe one of the two, it's a bipartisan approach that is being taken here. I think two of the people who are sort of the proponents of this bill that they're proposing to take before the Congress. One of them, I think, is a black chap. I think he's a Republican, but we have to see what comes out of that. But it seems to me that there is this bipartisan duo that are looking to fashion some kind of a bill to put before the U.S. Congress. And if it's a bipartisan thing, given the situation now that is unfolding in Ukraine with Russia, the Russian invasion, I do not think that the US Congress will have any difficulty passing this bill to avoid this question of the visa-free travel. This is what they're concerned about. These oligarchs and these people having all these passports, they can travel freely. This is another way of punishing. And I think, if anything at all, our passport program in the Caribbean will certainly be a casualty from that initiative there. But I just wanted to let us explore that a little bit more because, it seems to me that we need to take this very seriously, Dr. Andre. We've had several programs on the Global View on Q. We've looked at the economy and the question of lack of diversification. We looked at the program, the CBI program, and we said, look, all this money that's coming out of this shouldn't a considerable amount of that be invested in other sectors like manufacturing, like like agribusiness, like the art and cultural industries, agriculture? If we had done that and we had elevated those major sectors as major pillars of our economy, those would have created the jobs, they would have created the exports, and they would have really bolstered our economy so that it would have been more sustainable. We'd have had more, because more resilience, because a lot more people would have been employed. Instead, what we saw happening is that most of these funds went into hotels. Many of these hotels were built by foreigners. These projects, like the hospitals and many of these projects and the houses were built by foreign labor and foreign expertise with foreign equipment and so on. And so our local people have not benefited so much. But if we had, in fact, put a lot of that into manufacturing, and I know that Thomson will help me out with this one, because it seems to me that we probably missed a major opportunity there in not diversifying the economy when we had the amount of money that was available from the CBI program. Thompson, I wanted to go over to you to give me your thoughts on some of this, because you can see we're treading on dangerous territory, as it were, because the economy obviously is very unstable. It's not strong at all. If this thing were to collapse, I think we'll have problems. Over to you, Thompson. I'm not sure if you can hear us directly or if you have to listen to us on Facebook. So I know if it's on Facebook, then it'll take a minute for you to get it. But as soon as you can hear,
Yes, Sheridan, good evening to you and to the fellow panelists, as well as to our many listeners. Before I comment, Sheridan, on the impact, let me just remind our listeners what we're up against, and just clarify what the law, the proposed legislation in the U.S. Congress, which, by the way, is co-sponsored by both the Republicans and the Democrats, both a Democratic and a Republican senator, to increase the chances of it passing. And what it calls for is for a ban on the countries that are issuing what they call selling passports or have CBI programs, to put any of those countries that are on the visa waiver group. Dominica is not on the visa waiver, but the kicker is that they will work with the European countries to effectively ban any of the countries that have visa-free entry into Europe and the Shanghai region. So what this means effectively, countries like Dominica, who boasts and who has the major selling point is that we now have visa-free entry into the UK, into the Schengen countries, including particularly all of Europe, that this will be over, that they will in fact punish those countries. So what this effectively means is that all of us who are very happy to travel to Europe and to the UK without visas, then we'll have visas reimposed on us. But the stronger point about this is that it will effectively dry up the CBI program, I believe. I mean, we have been talking about the sustainability of this program for a long time, but the fact of the matter is, if all of a sudden the passport holders no longer have access to those visas, which will allow them visa-free entry into Europe, which is a main selling point of our CBI programs, then they will have no need for our passports. Because when you think about it, for every 5,000 persons who purchase Dominican passports, maybe one person comes to live in Dominica. We have very, very few of these individuals who have Dominican passports who actually live in Dominica. And you have very few who've even come to Dominica. So they're not buying the passports to come and live in Dominica or to visit Dominica. They're buying the passports because they want to review over Europe and the US. So if that is close to them, then you can rest assured that this spells the end of our passport program. In addition, just off the press this evening, there is news that the European Parliament will tomorrow approve a recommendation that will ban their own countries from taking part in these programs. As you know, Malta and a few European countries, they have those programs. So they're moving to ban their countries within the European Union from doing those golden passports. And I believe that as a next step to that, after they've banned their countries from doing it, then they will either remove the visa-free entry or they will ban those countries like Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia that are giving those things. So I think it's a very serious development. It's something that we've been warning against for many years. We've talked about the fact that this passport program is not sustainable. And we're seeing it come to pass, sadly. And I believe that with this war in Ukraine happening and the desire for countries to punish the Russians, and you know that there are many, I believe tens and scores and hundreds of Russians who have Dominican passports, that it is definitely going after them. But in the process, it might very well spell the end of the passport program. So what does that mean for Dominica? And as you rightly hinted, Mr. G, the fact of the matter is, all of those years, we have not used the windfall that we've gained from the passports to any good use in Dominica. Instead, we've placed the windfall into the hands of one man by the name of a Hayden gentleman. We put all of these billions of dollars in his hands, and tomorrow he can simply walk away. He can simply walk away from Dominica tomorrow. I don't think there is anything legally binding him to give this money back to Dominica. So you might find a situation where billions of our dollars just disappear overnight, hidden somewhere, and so effectively for us, the fact that we have not used these monies to invest, and that's what we have been saying all along. We kept telling the government every chance we had that they needed to put those resources into something that would benefit Dominica. They needed to put these resources into the agriculture sector, into developing the manufacturing sector, into developing renewable energies. There was enough money, or there still is enough money to develop those sectors so that when this program ends, that those industries will be sustained and will be able to provide jobs for the people of Dominica. But we are facing a very real situation that if this program is to dry up, as we think it will, in the next few months, in the next couple of years, then this government has nothing to show for it, and the country of Dominica will be in very dire straits. It means that the inability for the government to pay its public servants. It means the inability for government to pay suppliers and so on. The inability for government to do anything much because they would have run out of cash, they would have run out of money.
Yes, and thank you for those opening remarks, Dr. Fontaine. I want to go over to former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphine. You have served as Prime Minister of Dominica. I'm pretty sure that this is no stranger to you. You probably have been keeping up to date with what's going on there. I don't know whether you have any comments on some of the latest developments that we've been hearing about with regards to what is going on in the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, the U.K. Parliament, and the European Parliament. As you heard from Thomson as well, I mean, this thing looks imminent that they're going to pass this legislation in North America, in Europe, in the U.K. that is going to come down very hard on this visa-free travel. And what obviously these people really, the reason why they buy in this passport, some of them, as Dr. Andre said, some of them maybe for nefarious reasons. They want to be able to travel incognito. So they have second passports on the different names sometimes, I imagine. So it means that this might come to an how happens to really this source of funds dries up. And now in the meantime, we don't have any strong or the economic pillars to rely on, because we were told if not passports, then what? So Prime Minister O.J. Seraphine, maybe you can turn on your mic and you can just maybe give us your thoughts on some of those there.
Well, thank you, Sheridan, Mr. G, which is not a normal way to call you, seeing that we have that friendship of such long history. But Mr. G, for the purpose of this particular audience, I'm looking at some quotations that I had prepared for another opportunity. And it says, we all have a story to tell. I'm grateful that I can tell mine. And another one was, never for the sake of peace be quiet or deny your right to think and speak. I look at this and I say this is an opportunity really to go deep into history of that passport uh, program of Dominica. Because for every situation that unfolds, there is a history, there is a root to whatever the tree is. And the root of the citizenship or economic citizenship program, citizenship by investment, re-engineered citizenship program, all of those began some time back. And it is interesting that I recall one of the charges that were laid against my government was the fact that it was said that we had passports for sale. And if you remember that, the New Chronicle or the Old Chronicle had this covering because of a release that was done by an American newspaper that seemed to be saying that there were passports for sale and $50,000 was the mentioned figure for it. The interesting dynamic about that, however, was that in 1979, there was the arrival of the Shah of Iran in Iran. And at that particular moment in time, the persons who led the country, the Shah, his family, his attorneys, his bankers, his associates, were running for their lives. And we were having an interesting moment to discuss with some of the representatives of the Shah of Iran as to ways and means by which we could recognize them as persons who are seeking refugee status as a consequence of the return of the Ayatollah back into Iran. And those discussions concluded with an arrangement where the International Development and Management Company was formed, and that was passed in the legislature of Dominica. It's in the Hansard. And on the 23rd of February 1980, a law was passed, or an agreement was accepted, that allowed for the arrangement for persons who are looking for refugee status in Dominica based upon the political difficulties that they were expecting, and which was, of course, was very, very clear, would happen to them because of the Shah's very violent streak of response to persons, not the Shah, but the Ayatollah's response to persons who were close to the Shah. And so as a result of that, we then went into an agreement with my government went into agreement, and that was tabled in the parliament. And the idea, of course, fits into exactly what Mr. G was talking about. That is to use the resources from such an economic citizenship program to the advantage of Dominica in a diversification. Let me just make it very clear. There was the arrangement by agreement that for every arrival who's escaping the situation in Iran, that they would have paid $1 million US as a condition of their getting a passport. There was a $50,000 that was a fee to be paid for due diligence, and in the event that within a year or thereabout that the information that we got was incorrect, or that the people were of ill repute, that we would seize the $50,000, and in any event that any investment that they would have made by that time would not be returned. In this context, therefore, the $50,000 that was mentioned in the passport for sale program on the newspapers of Dominica at the time was in direct relation to a charge that was being laid for the purpose of due process of inquiry. In that program, and that's where I come to Mr. G's recommendation, the following were made very clear: that for fisheries, there would be $250,000, for artisans, $500,000 USD, and for other aspects of our diversification, which included, interestingly enough, geothermal, housing, port expansion, and the airport development. All of that was part of that agreement on page 4 of the agreement. And I know Dr. Andre is the historian, and I would suggest that he go back to the Hansard of the date which I just mentioned, which is the 24th of February 1980, to confirm that this in fact took place. So therefore, I am saying that at the time when the citizenship program became very attractive for political mileage, all of a sudden everybody forgot that the inception, the birth of the citizenship for economic reasons did in fact begin on the 24th of February of 1980. This passport for sale program, however, became the most, I would say, visible and tangible attack that was laid against my government for so-called corruption. And indeed, after the elections were over, a committee was formed by the incoming government of Eugenia Charles, which included persons like Blanchard of the police department, Eugene and Hector of the Inland Revenue, and I believe it was Ozzy Luis of the other department. Those persons made an inquiry as to how this passport money was received, if it was, and at the end of the day, the different charges that were laid against my government were put to rest. So then came the next government, which is Eugenia Charles's government. And we seem to forget that for every situation, whilst we are talking about what's occurring right now, as far as the program of the CBI is being mentioned, there are other aspects of it that we have to take into consideration. That the government that came after was Eugenia Charles's government. And lo and behold, there was this Greystone arrangement for selling passports, basically in China, for the purposes of the economic citizenship. But more than anything else, it was based upon a political reality that I believe it was in 1997, it was going to be that Hong Kong was going to be going back from the British to China. And consequently, people who had the means wanted to escape from Hong Kong, wanted to get away from the difficulties of having their funds being protected. And they joined this passport program that was created by Eugenia Charles, and for which Lennox Linton ended up in all kinds of situations where he was embroiled with illegalistics that for whatever reason, he was unable to prove his case. But at the end of the exercise, the reality was that Eugenia Charles was in fact one of the owners, allegedly, of the Lai River Hotel, and consequently her appointment by decree of an honorary consul to represent Dominica in China and Hong Kong led to the benefit to Lai River Hotel. So that tells you where that went. In addition to that, Eugenia Charles had in fact found some people who were well placed within her social circle. At that point, there was people like Angus Edwards, a guy from Portsmouth who has some Dominican roots, who was close to her. There was Rose Ed at Calibishi with a program there. There was the Garway Hotel. Of course, we still know that Garway Hotel was involved with the Freedom Party in a very strong way. And there were one or two other persons who were picked because of their political partisanship. Those of us who were in the small hotel and eco-inns, etc., were unable to qualify. And so every effort to qualify failed. And there was documentation that was presented by us. At this point, I'll say, Mr. Gregoire, when you were at the embassy, and we had produced a cabinet paper for the then Minister Norris Prevost. And in that cabinet paper, a copy I have before me, because one of my weaknesses, you would say, is that every little piece of paper that passed through my hands over the years, I keep it, except for those that went by the hurricane. And in there, our cabinet paper, which I believe you assisted in producing, if I'm not mistaken, it says, notwithstanding, it is clearly evident that our small hotels cannot successfully operate within the confines of the current financing plan. Therefore, it is necessary that a refinancing plan is developed for local hotels to permit their viability and to avoid the transformation of ownership from indigenous investors to foreign investors. So here we are, that the small hotels, the eco-inns of which I was a founder member, one of those who created the organization to represent the small indigenous hoteliers, as well as a founder member of the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association. Our case was made to the NDC, was made to the Ministry of Tourism, and that's where this cabinet paper came from. The Aid Bank, so then it goes on, the Aid Bank, in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, should be mandated to seek creative concessionary financing in order to refinance loans to small hotels. The target should be at least 25-year single-digit interest rate and with a moratorium of 5 years. It goes on to be, it's a little detailed, so I'll stop here and go on to the final paragraph, that the Aid Bank reschedules the balance of loan portfolios remaining after the said conversion to a 20-year repayment plan aimed at reducing the size of repayments. The Aid Bank immediately would operationalize a venture capital fund supporting financing of small hotels, and especially including financing for product development, management, marketing, and trading. Mark you, that's the very same point that you, Mr. Gregoire, is making, that there should be an understanding that whatever comes out of this creative means of getting money for Dominica through the CBI or Economic Citizenship Program or re-engineered program, whatever name you want to give it, that should include the financing for the product development of the small hotels. And finally, in that signed by, which was Honorable Norris Prevost, Minister for Tourism, Ports and Employment, that the Aid Bank finances the working capital requirements of the said local hotels, new or refinanced local hotels, for the first year of operations of the restructured regime of such financing is therefore necessary. I'm saying so against this backdrop that what you are alluding to, which is that the funds that you're getting from that source of money, that's from the CBI, should be spent in terms of the developing the indigenous hoteliers. And I will say this too. There's a document which I gave to the government which came in 2000, and it reads as follows. In 2002, I sent a debt forgiveness and refinancing document which I prepared for the Hotel Association. Germane to the present crisis of the hotel and inabilities to sustain the capacities to meet bank repayments are the following: high cost of servicing loans due to the high interest rates, which are not in harmony with international tourism jurisdictions, which are our competitors. Low hotel occupancy is affecting capacities to meet bank repayment schedules, ineffective marketing by the state, non-existent budgets for promotion by individual hotels, tired hotel plants, equipment, and facilities, and limited air access. So therefore, there's a need for debt forgiveness. In that regard, the bank interest rates, which have piled up over the years of low occupancy and inactivity, if forgiven by purchase through special arrangements with central government and its agencies, will alleviate the debt burden of the hotel sector. There's a much more
let me just,
to that thing. I'm only saying this to add to your point, that in fact, when we got the monies through the CBI, these are the areas where it could have assisted. And as we speak, all the small hotels are now defunct and disabled.
Well, yes. In other words, that's why I wanted to stop you there, because you see, I want us to discuss that a little bit and put it in the context of what is happening today, because the same recommendations that were made then apply now. And if we had followed those recommendations and used these resources from the CBI program to do just those things, many of our small hotels like the Anchorage Hotel and the Castle Comfort Lodge and the Hotel and the Papillon and all of these hotels, they would be up and running. And so we had many of these hotels. So Dr. Andre, I wanted to go over to you, because you can see that we really have missed the boat, because in those days even there wasn't this largesse of money from the CBI program, it wasn't that much. But then you find that today there's been so much over the past few years, and yet we have not done anything to diversify the economy, to strengthen some of the other sectors. And even in the hotel sector, where a lot of the money has gone. We have made no effort to really strengthen the indigenous hotels, which really have been the backbone of our tourism in Dominica. We have allowed that to just go to waste. Dr. Andre, I wanted to get your some of your own suggestions and your inputs on some of those.
You see, the difficulty is not that we have not funded indigenous hotels and such institutions. The fundamental problem is that we've lost the significance of what it is to be independent. We've lost the significance of what it is to, I'm getting feedback, of what it is to be an independent nation. We've lost the significance of what it means to develop our own people. You see, we one of the government folks a few years ago said, and poor fellow, he didn't really appreciate that it was an ironic commentary on his own self. He lambasted the opposition for being jealous of him because, as a poor boy from one of the villages, he's now consorting with billionaires and billionaires with a crooked past. But that is the aspiration. The aspiration is not consorting with your own. The aspiration is not consorting with those who seek a leg up. The aspiration is not uplifting. The aspiration is not creating a tide of opportunity which will rise and float every vessel. The aspiration is to be consorting with every crook you can find in the dark underworld of criminal activity. If that is your aspiration, then obviously you have no interest in assisting small hotels. You have no interest in assisting small farmers. You have no interest in empowering your workers. You have no interest in creating or nurturing the environment for your small businesses to prosper. You don't give anything about them because you want to consort with every crooked individual, whether it's in Vanuatu, whether it's in Lagos, or whether it's some dark recesses of some town or city in some international country. If that is your aspiration, clearly everything you do is a negation and it's an abortion of local enterprise. It's an abortion of local industry. Where is the agro industry? Where are the crops that we make from bananas? Where are the juices that we make from our indigenous fruit? Where is the much promised solar energy? How much money have we spent on it? Bear in mind, I think Gabriel Christian and people like Adenauer Douglas will indicate the efforts they made in 2008 to try to get a concession from the government to produce um, uh, energy.
Because wind, solar, and wind energy.
That's right.
Mhm.
You know, and what did the government do? They cast them by the wayside. They went with an organization which, quite frankly, had disgraced itself already in another sister West Indian island. And today, over $100 million later, we haven't produced enough of that type of energy, not even to put lights in a latrine in up the road in Trafalgar. But that is the type of philosophy that we seem to have embraced. How to enrich those from abroad, how to enrich those so-called fly-by-night advisors from Barbados, how to enrich those so-called investors from Iran who adopt English-sounding names, how to enrich those who skim the profits of their state and come with their Gucci clothing. And there is nothing as attractive to the wannabe politician than to be consorting with these folk because of their small egos. That is how they feel that they've made it. That is how they feel that they become somebody by consorting with those fly by night individuals, those investors who do not invest a dollar in Dominica, but who live Dominica with 30 million pieces of silver. That is the pinnacle of our aspiration, sadly. It's a gross abomination. It's a fundamental indictment of what we've produced in 2022 after so many years of independence. Obviously, we can't go anywhere. We are just waiting with bated breath. Some of us will not rest easily at night. Regardless of whether we sleep on 20 coconut fiber mattresses, we will not sleep easily at night because we know the US is waiting with bated breath. Because there will come a time, you can call it karma, you can call it retribution, you can call it the ill gotten gains and the fruits of your ill gotten labor, when many of these folk will pay a price, as many Caribbean leaders have paid a price for selling out their nation. Go and ask that Barbados minister who was sentenced a few years ago in New York for scamming just 30,000 US dollars, just 30,000. We're not even talking about millions. And that, unfortunately and sadly, is where we are as an independent nation. That is what many of us, or too many of us, take pride in, that we are consorting with those folks with their Gucci'd reputation and with their ill-gotten splendor. But fortunately, the time will come when you have to render to Caesar what is due to Caesar. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Andre and Thompson, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. I mean, you can see from what Dr. Andre has been saying, and you can see from what former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphine said in terms of what was the attempt to develop the small business sector and the other sectors besides the tourism sector. You know, the small hotels, the small manufacturers, the small farmers, the agribusiness. In other words, the idea was, even at that time, at that early stage, to give a boost to those sectors, to strengthen those sectors so they could become the export generating machines of the country, to earn the foreign earnings, you know, to build the economies and create the jobs, right? And improve the GDP of the country and your debt to GDP ratio. And so essentially, the fact about it, these things, they have not done that. This has not been done for the past few years. And you can see why so many of the factories that we had are no longer in existence. There's a whole proliferation, a whole list of them that were there that required that kind of support, but they never got that kind of support. And therefore, they're no longer in existence. If think about the Paul Pastoroni and the Paul Plastic and the Benja shoes and the factories of making garments. If all of those things were still there, and the Blows Agro products and the Bellows and all of that, you know, if can you imagine how big those things would be today if we had given them that kind of support? I want to go over back to you, Thompson. I know it'll probably take a few seconds for you to pick us up because you have to listen through Facebook. But as soon as the message gets, you can just come in and contribute to the discussion, because I think it is really timely that we're having this on what may be the eve of some kind of problems we're going to have with these passport programs. That is conceivable. And so we need to prepare ourselves and prepare the country to do some tighten our belts and do
You
something
know,
about it.
Sheridan, as you were talking and also listening to the Prime Minister, which is Seraphine, as well as Dr. Andre, you know, when you think about it, the idea was a brilliant one. The idea of the program itself to allow individuals to invest in Dominica, and at the same time you use these resources to invest in the productive sector. So we got, for example, I believe some of this money was used to invest in Galway Hotel, Jungle Bay when it was in Daly's, got the monies that way from the sale of the passports. There were other schemes that were tried, but this government got extremely greedy. They saw it as a means not to improve the lives of Dominicans, not to support local restaurateurs or hoteliers. They saw it not as an opportunity to strengthen the manufacturing sector or to invest in the agriculture sector, but they saw it as their personal ticket to wealth. And so we've seen the reports of the several foreign bank accounts that are owned. When I did work, and I've said that publicly before, I'm not saying anything new, but some people may not have heard it. But when I worked for a month in the Cayman Islands, I was called in. At the time I was an employer of the IMF. I got special leave to go to the Cayman Island. I was shocked I was shocked to see accounts belonging to Dominicans in the millions of dollars. These were individuals who have enriched themselves. So these monies were not coming into Dominica. Personally, over the years, we have traced at least 20 crooks and criminals with Dominican passports, at least 20, because they threw out even the vetting process that was so critical to this. Now, the European Union, when they first voted on this, even before the Ukrainian war, they were moving against the passports. And the committee that was to make the proposal to the bigger European Parliament, they had this to say about the golden passport. They said golden passports, meaning those passports with the programs, are objectionable ethically, legally, and economically, and pose several serious security risks. And these are the risks, these are the security risks that we try to speak about when we talked about the fact that the government moved away from really vetting, to doing due diligence. They said, no, we do due diligence, but you do due diligence, and it was found that individuals, a simple Google search would show that these individuals were criminals, either evading US taxes or doing other things. So we moved away. This government of Roosevelt Skerrit moved away from the purpose which the program was designed for. They moved away, propelled by greed and building up their personal wealth. And that is why we're in this situation today. And that is why the countries are moving so quickly. And you can be sure that the legislation will pass in the European Parliament. And as they ban their own countries, only 3 countries, imagine, only 3 countries in Europe has those programs. It's Malta, Cyprus, and Bulgaria. And as they move to ban those countries, they will impose a price on countries like Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. So in a way, it is really depressing to me that we had a situation where we could have used these millions of dollars that was generated for this program to really, as we say in local parlance, set up our country. But instead, these monies were frittered away, put away in slush funds overseas. And the Dominican people have not seen it. I mean, we could have, a good suggestion was made by Honorable Leonard Slinton the last time we spoke about this. He said the amount of money that is out there could clear Dominica's debt. Dominica would become the first country with zero debt. We would have cleared the debt with still a few billions left over. But none of that has happened. None of that has taken place. And we find ourselves in a situation where the world is coming down with a hammer that is made urgent now by what is happening in the Ukraine. At the end of the day, all innocent, a few the airport in London, and I was pulled over by the security personnel checking the passports. I was pulled across for what they call secondary screening.
Thomson, I suspect you're having some bandwidth problems there with your internet. So maybe you could get back to us when you have a little better.
Looked like they were from Dominica. He tells me I see these passports all the time. I see these passports all the time going through. But that's the first time I saw somebody looking like they may be from Dominica. So they have had their eyes on this. If you look at the wording in the communique from the U.S. Congress, it is clear that they've had their eyes for many, many years on that scheme, and they're moving to really think. And at the end of the day, we will have nothing to show for it, and the program would have ended. And that, to me, is a very sad day for Dominica.
Yes, and thank you for that, Thomson. I want to go back over to former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphine for a minute, because but as I do that, Lambi, I just want to let you know that we need to take some calls. So could you give our listeners the numbers, and so they can at their leisure, they can make a call, and you just let us know when the call comes so that we can take them.
This is the Global View and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. And for those in the international community overseas, the number is 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yeah, so former Prime Minister Oliver Seraphine, I hope you don't mind if Lambi interrupts us. Lambi, you have a call. Let's take it.
Yes, we do have a call. Let's take this call. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. Are you all hearing me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question, and I think some of you all can answer that question for me. Can you tell the Dominican people how America, Canada, and England deals with like giving people passport in like when they how you call I'll put that people invest when people invest in these countries, how do they obtain their passport? Is it like how Dominica and some other countries in the Caribbean doing it? Because tonight I heard a man call the radio and he said that America gives CBI, Canada gives CBI, and England gives CBI, and none of the men on the program tell him, no, that's not so. That's not how it works. Can you all tell the people of Dominica how does that thing work for us, please? Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. We need to really make that comparison. So I hope, Dr. Andre, I'm hoping that yourself and Dr. Fontaine can help the caller with the answer to this in terms of what obtains in Canada, what obtains in the United States, as far as you're aware of.
Well, that's one of the bogus arguments made by those who profit from the cynical and capricious scheme of passport selling and pocketing monies that otherwise should go to the Treasury. Canada doesn't sell, has no program of selling passports as if it's a hand of bananas over the counter in exchange for money. Canada has an investment program. And certainly if a prospective investor meets the criteria for the investment, then ultimately he or she can gain residency and then citizenship to Canada. But to suggest that somehow the Canadian program in terms of investment is similar or is analogous to one where if you can come up with the right amount of money, our prime minister can personally deliver a diplomatic passport to somebody who has a dubious past, that is quite shameless and it has no basis in fact. So that is one argument that is often used to justify this program. It's an argument based and predicated on fabrication and falsehood. It is simply not true.
Yes, and Dr. Thomson Fontaine, when you're able to hear me, because you have a delay because you're on Facebook, you might want to contribute to that the answer to that question as well, because obviously some of this is going around and nobody's really answering it properly in terms of what the situation is in the US. And I believe that former Prime Minister Seraphine may have a contribution that he can make to that as well. But Dr. Fontaine, if you're hearing me, you can just go right ahead. Well, I'm not sure that Dr. Fontaine is hearing me yet, because I know he has a delay because he's listening to us on Facebook because of his bandwidth.
Yes, indeed, Sheridan. I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Andre. It's not true. There's absolutely no comparison between what happens, for example, in the US, where you have to have at least half a $1,000,000 and employ at least 5 persons, which means you have to be resident, you have to be living in the country. That is very different. As I said before at the start, you have very few, we have a few Russians living in Dominica, yes, but very few of the people who receive the passports from Dominica actually live in Dominica. So you cannot make the comparison. As I said before, the only 3 countries in Europe that has that program that is similar to Dominica and that they're going to put an end to is Malta, Cyprus, and Bulgaria. The UK has the golden visas where, given a certain amount of money, you could also, open accounts and so on in the United Kingdom. Again, that is very different from what we offer. So this idea that the way we have cheapified our program, where we have a race to the bottom to get the cheapest. At one point, Dominica was being touted as the cheapest program. We saw our passports being hawked openly on the streets in Dominica. Not in Dominica, in Kabul. It
In
was in
Cancun.
Kabul. You had the guys selling
That's
our
right.
passports like hot bread,
Yes.
and it was mind-boggling then, and it's still shocking to me that our passports were going so cheaply. And I suspect probably some of these were even, and Sheridan, you will also realize as well that we have a race to go to this biometric issue. I believe it is again very likely, given the fact that our passports were everywhere, that there very well could have been fraudulent passports on the market. And hence the reason to put this biometric chip in our passports. Because those passports that were being sold in Kabul did not appear to me that they were legit. And especially considering that that's not the way it's supposed to be done. It's only after you apply for the passport, that's when the passport is supposed to be mailed to you. The fact that one individual had hundreds of blank passports showing up on the streets of Kabul told me something was wrong with this. So we've compromised the security of countries like the United States. We've compromised the security of the European countries, and now we'll have to pay a price for it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Fontaine. And Lambi, I think you had a call, Lambi, let's take it before I go to former Prime Minister Seraphine.
Yes, caller on the line. You make a call now. Go ahead, please.
All right, Nambi.
Yes.
Hey, Nambi.
Go right ahead.
Okay, good. Hey, I just wanna say I like the question that Blue asked, because this is one of the things I wanted to call earlier on the program prior to this one. Now, Dr. Andre answered it, but I'm just gonna add another piece to it. The same program America has, that money goes into the American Treasury. It don't stay outside of the country. And like Dr. Andre says, investors invest, and that money does not touch anyone's hand. They make sure that person invests money into the country. It's not one of them bogus deal where they just tell you it's a CBI and a passport is given to somebody anywhere in the Middle East or in Russia or wherever, or somebody carried to them undelivered. That's not how it's done. So all this innuendos that they try to equate with America, Canada, and other places with the passport program, it's a lie. Because I heard a gentleman call himself the brain a while ago, call and say, well, America has it and not. But they got to explain to the people. Now, Sheridan, I have one question for your former Prime Minister, and I've always wanted to ask him that. If he want to answer it, it's fine. If he don't, it's okay too. I just wanted to ask him, why would he involve himself in that passport trade-off during the last election, and got himself involved in the Al Jazeera fiasco that expose Al Jazeera had, and he was brokering the deal to get himself a $50 deal for brokering the deal. I thought that was distasteful. Ex-Prime Minister, I don't know the gentleman. I'm not going to throw no stones at him, but I'm just asking a question because it has always stood with me for some reason or another. Why would a man of that caliber do something like that? And I'm listening, would like to hear his answer.
Well, thank you for that, Marcus. And I believe the former Prime Minister, his English has always been better than mine. And I believe he's quite capable, and I expect that he will answer. But I just wanted to say before I go over to him, that, Dr. Andre, you went and you troubled Blue. You call her name and you tell her she have to sing calmer. You see now she start putting hard questions at you. So good for you. Lambi, before I go over to former Prime Minister Seraphine, have you got another call or should I go to him? Okay, let me go over to you, former Prime Minister Seraphine. The caller asked you a question, but I also wanted you to address your mind to something here. You did mention that since in 1980, when this program came up with you under your regime. But let me just go back to Lambi before I go to you.
Yeah.
Lambi, let's take a call.
The call 95, please go ahead with your call.
Hello, good evening. I'm wondering, as I'm listening to your program, saying that they have called us to bring in our old passports to get the passports. What is the status of those citizens who have those old passports that we used to have? Do they have the e-passports before we have them, or how are they going to change them? Thank you very much.
So just another great question. The Dr. Andre, I don't know whether you want to take a bite at this, but Lambi, let's take another call from you, Lambi. You don't have one, so let's go over to Dr. Andre.
Yes, we have another call on the line. Caller, please go ahead on the overseas line.
Yes, I was listening to a program just before you guys came on, and there was a gentleman who's supposed to be a minister in New York government, Henderson. That man was very rude. I can't understand how any country would have such a person talking down to under citizens. He's a very rude person. I hope he doesn't last long as a minister. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Andre, maybe you might take a shot at that question as well. And Lambi, let me just ask Dr. Andre to deal with those two questions before we go over to former Prime Minister Seraphine. Your mic is muted.
Perhaps I'm just unnaturally cynical, but I have serious concerns about the haste, the unseemly haste with which they're trying to bring these e-passports into existence. What is the purpose of it? To what extent does it perhaps serve a political agenda, particularly when it comes to voting? Does it enable persons to vote without being in Dominica, without coming to Dominica? I don't know, but it is just, in my view, very suspicious that there is this haste to ushering these passports. Let me indicate to you this. There are Dominicans, by virtue of being born in Dominica, by virtue of their parents being Dominicans, who have waited months and months to renew their passports, to obtain a so-called CARICOM passport without success. I know of some who have actually asked for a refund of their money because of the amount of time it takes to obtain these passports. And yet all of a sudden, perhaps because of manna delivered to them by Jesus on tablets of stone, they want to have e-passports within a narrow time frame, a narrow window. We have to be questioning. We cannot just accept these things without questioning what is the motivation. Because one thing we know, the overarching philosophy is self-perpetuation. One of the callers talk about the arrogance of a minister. I didn't hear the program. I can't comment on it. But that is the currency. That is the currency, unfortunately, which many of our leaders trade in today. This arrogance, this overgrown sense of self or importance, this speaking down to the folk, the fact that what is their sense of what is derogatory is sharper than a bloodhound. This is what masquerades as leadership now. No longer do we see and experience and enjoy the humility of an Edward Oliver LeBlanc, for example. No longer do we walk without a shirt and tie on the streets and say hi and hello and talk on the sidewalk to some of the folk. No, we have to be chauffeured in tinted windows, in tinted splendor, in tinted SUVs with a train of security guards guarding you probably against sandflies or mosquitoes in the unclean drains of Roseau. That is a measure of the leadership ethos that we have nurtured today. And that is one of the reasons why we're in this state. There was a calypso, even there, that calypso which Pastor Roddy plays. We're not building character. We're building hotels.
Skyscraper.
That's right. Despite the fact that the occupancy rate, you know better than I, probably, Dr. Fontaine, is less perhaps than 30%. But we are witnessing an orgy of building a hotel. Why? Who is going to fill those empty rooms? Who is going to be employed? Who is getting the commissions? Who is funding these projects? That is the question. These are the types of questions that we have to ask ourselves, because that is what is sucking the blood of the nation as we know it. So when these little pompous fellows come on their little radio stations, speaking a kind of high convoluted English, as if they still live in the 60s and 70s when they can fool the people, we should not be afraid to challenge them. We should not be afraid to confront them verbally, not physically, verbally, to show that, quite frankly, we see through their superficialities and their selfishness. We should take on that challenge, because by taking on that challenge, we are preserving our island.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. I wanted to go over to former Prime Minister Seraphine. I just wanted to, because you have a question from a caller, but I also wanted you to address your mind to this, that you remember you mentioned that since in 1980, this sort of concept for a program started, and the figure of $1 million stood out as an investment. And you also indicated that investment was supposed to be used to help to diversify the economy, to go into small business and manufacturing and agribusiness and so on, and small hotels and whatnot. And then if we fast forward to a few years later, we'll find that our friend Mr. Sam Raphael himself and one or two other people, they were part of the re-engineered program on the United Workers' Party. And that program, the funds went in, they came into Dominica. They were in Dominica. And they were able to then borrow from that money to build the hotels. And Mr. Sam Raphael, I think, was very successful in utilizing that money, which came into the country. It was in the funds. And then he was able to borrow from that and build his hotel. And he was very successful at building the Jungle Bay Resort and Spa. I'm not so sure why it is so important now to have a totally different thing where all these commissions and all this money goes. You don't know where the money is and nobody knows where it's going to. And then people get this. I'm not sure why there was a need for that when already there was success. I wanted you to address your mind to some of those things, former Prime Minister Seraphine. You could turn your mic on.
Yes, Sheridan. I did expect that one of your callers would be talking about this very famous Al Jazeera matter, which came up a couple of years ago. The answer to that is simply this, that I would like to address it in another setting where we could spend more time, because it's a long response that goes into the depth of the rationale for that. And all it says to me at this time is to say this, that my effort at informing a client that his best way to find some arrangement to become useful to Dominica is to demonstrate his capacity so to do. In fact, I'll just refer very briefly to a letter from the individual involved, Mr. Sekal McLean, who sent me a letter for the Prime Minister of Dominica. And he said, my name is Sekal McLean, KST. I've lived in Asia for over 30 years, starting in the UK and China and through the Philippines. I know most prominent families and politicians here, as well as having dealt with all the larger companies in Southeast Asia and China. I have mandated Honorable Seraphine, former Prime Minister of Dominica, to present my credentials to you. That's a letter to the Prime Minister of Dominica. I'm seeking to assist the process of the development in your country for my considerable investment connections. Honorable Seraphine, Oliver Seraphine, has been authorized to present the process of my interest to you. However, I personally will be available to address my matter should you choose to direct any matter to me directly. I look forward to hearing from you. I was asked to meet this gentleman through his agent in Panama, and I believe I will go on because it's no point of stopping halfway.
Well, but do you really want to spend all the rest of the time?
That's the point. That's the point. So I would like to be in another program. I would like
think,
to be in another program where we could go in some clarity as to the rationale for this, and to also clear Linton and, if necessary, the Prime Minister directly as far as this person is concerned and what transpired. It was a hit job from Al Jazeera. However, I'd like to do it some other time when there is enough time that we could spend on it. But suffice it to say that the true worth of a man, as I have written, is to be true to oneself and to remain an independent thinker, irrespective of the travails, and to find solace not in man, but only in Almighty God who direct one's path. I do want to say this, that what I did was in all honesty, and I would like to be very clear with it, in some detail, at some point when a program like that could be brought together for a purpose for clearing the air. Because it was a very, very signal moment at an elections 2 years ago, and I'd like to clear the air on it at another convenient moment for your program.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll be happy to try to facilitate that, because I think the caller had a genuine concern, and I think he would really like to get an answer. So I think maybe at an appropriate time.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. Lambi, I don't know whether you have any calls for us at this time. So if you don't, then Dr. Fontaine, I wanted to get back to you on this, because you see, it is so important for us before we move on to the other segment of our program tonight, because we are supposed to be talking about Mr. Oliver J. Seraphine's legacy. But before we get to that, I wanted us to dwell a little bit more, just for a few more minutes, on this whole thing, because it seems to me that we cannot underestimate the impact of what this could have on our economy and on our people. But let me just go back to Lambi before I go to you, Thomson. Lambi, let's take the call.
Yes, the caller on the overseas line, please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. Mr. G. Lambert,
Yes. Good evening.
former Prime Minister and my boss at one time. I listened to the program. Mr. Sheridan, there is something that I don't hear very often talked about. It was that you became the Prime Minister at the most challenging time in the history of Dominica, in that it was immediately after a government had been overthrown. The country was in turmoil, and then in came Hurricane David, which later we learned was a Cat 5.
Are you through, caller?
Yes.
No, I was because I knew, and we never heard complain about people still on the trampoline, and this sort of stuff. And they seem to be giving that credit to the Freedom Party administration, when in fact they came into office approximately about a year, 2 years, only about 2 years after the hurricane and after that disaster, when the country had already been literally stabilized in a way. I don't know if you want to comment and clarify some of those things.
Yes, former Prime Minister Seraphine, I think the question was, but it looks to me like what is happening here is that we kind of segue into your legacy in any event, because it seems to me that is what is happening here. So let's get into it. I think you can start off with where the caller just left off. Let's take a little time and let's deal with that. I hope you can try to punctuate it, because I know it probably is a very lengthy matter, but you know the question of time. So do your best to put in as much as you can. You have to turn on your mic. Your mic is off. You need to turn.
Thank you very much for this intro and the recognition by this individual of those particular moments in our history. To be very honest, and let me be very blunt, I take huge offense to the fact that our country was in such disaster as it pertains to a constitution that had been adopted in November 3rd of 1978, and that by May 29th of the following year, that there was mayhem. And I suppose some of those details will come out very much more in the time frame of May 29th of this year. So I wouldn't spend too much time on the details of it. But all I will say is, and then let me divert to Sheridan. You're one of those who came to me, and as I believe you were the president of the DIC, and you said that there was a committee for national salvation that had been formed in order to resurrect our country from the calamity that found itself, where there was a president that had left in the dead of night and left the country without a president, that another president had been attacked, his vehicle was turned upside down by fervent, passionate supporters of the opposition, including possibly, allegedly, the president as well, were all parts of that group of persons that were involved with this, and that the country had no president. We had persons from the various representatives who resigned under stones and attacks. You are one of those who came to me and said, listen, a committee have been formed, and of the most prestigious, recognized organizations of the state, from youth, from the farmers union, from the trade union movement, from the church movement, from the business movement of the agencies of Dominica. 26, I think it was, of the persons who represent Dominica. So I was first nominated and presented with this opportunity to become the prime minister of an interim situation, but without being given the opportunity to become a prime minister in a legislative way that would conform with the Constitution. When I found out from, I should mention his name, he's passed away, Michael Douglas, and of course, another one who has passed away, Jeff Joe, who came to my house and told me that there was a movement afoot to go behind Patrick John up in Montrose, where Patrick John had put the sandbags. He had put the sandbags in preparation for a coming of the mob. And there was an intention for the mob to attack him, and there was supposedly someone in there who was supposed to get rid of him as well. So we had been faced with a situation that was very, very diabolical and very hostile to the principles of our Constitution. When I was offered that opportunity to become the leader of the country by the CNS, I quickly moved further than the CNS expected and formed the Democratic Labour Party, which was able to attract members of the PJ Labour Party so that we could get a majority of members in the parliament, and I became a constitutional prime minister. Lo and behold, I became subjected to a lot of threats on both sides of the political divide. There was an expectation from the left that maybe there could be an opportunity to take over, as did Maurice Bishop. There was a situation where persons who were on the streets in Fontaine and in Soufriere and in Portsmouth looking for the so-called invasion that's supposed to come from other places. I had situations where my wife was subjected to my own defense force, saying in the dark of night, OJ is a wanted man, wanted. And my wife said, what you mean? He said, wanted man? He said, yes, dead or alive. And she called on Newton, who has passed away through hanging, that he sent a convoy to take away the security guards at the time. I formed what you call a national group, youth group, civil defense unit of young people to guard me and help me in my security, because I didn't trust the police either. So I had a situation where my life was on the line. It was not a joke. And then we went out through the world to seek assistance. And you, Sheridan Gregoire, was with me when we went to Barbados. And we were able to get assistance through the convening of the majority of donor countries that was heralded through a meeting of the CDB. And a number of programs of assistance was offered to us by way of that meeting, where I was able to make a case to the world community. I was also able to go to the United Nations, to the Organization of American States, to visit Florence McDonald in Canada, the British government, the French government, etc., etc. And I could go on for the next hour and a half as to what was done. And so to me, I thought it was demeaning and disrespectful when a certain prime minister were to say, well, you know, during the time of the hurricane, we know that OJ got Brogodo. Whilst I was sitting there, I found that demeaning and disrespectful. And I'm suggesting to you, the listeners, that we had just come from independence and we did not have any foreign policy partners at the time. We did not have any persons that we were associated with diplomatically because we were coming from a relationship with Britain. So therefore, the trips began, and Venezuela, that same Venezuela of today, entered into a contract of cooperation with me. And for your information, among the things that was agreed to was an international airport at Grand Savannah. And Babs Dyer, who became the Minister of Communications and Works after I left office, will attest to this, that there were funds made available. In fact, there was a, in the Ministry of Communications and Works, there is a report from the Venezuelan government as it pertains to the international airport at Grand Savannah. The Venezuelans also offered assistance in various ways. My relationship with the OAS was substantial, where Ophila, who was the Secretary General, befriended me when he heard me at a speech at the OAS. He found it very, to him, informative, and he suggested that I become, as it were, someone who could act on his behalf to go throughout the Caribbean and get support for him in an incoming election of the OAS Secretary General's position, which I did on the understanding that there was a Bajan who would be made Deputy Secretary General with the support of South American countries. And as a result of that, he gave me two advisors. One, a gentleman from Guyana, who was together with Atlanta Professor Ivor Michel and Wilbert Bascom, and they were resident at my house. And we sat morning, noon, and night, whenever I'm off my office, to discuss strategies for development of Dominica. And it's against that background, therefore, that I happen to have had sufficient intellectual ammunition, with you being a friend, Sheridan at the time, with Norris Prevost visiting very regularly and giving some advice. And it's because of that cushion of support that I got that we were able to develop so many projects based upon a foreign policy program. Through a relationship with the UN, through the OAS, through Africa, when we were the first country in the Caribbean to recognize the Sahara independence group organization there. Of course, Europe, where we got Stabex and so on, the appointment of Dr. Benjamin. In other words, the international community, you could name them, be it CARICOM, be it CDB, with Grenada, be it France. I became a friend of France, and they were able to give us a support. And so at the end of the day, my becoming a prime minister of Dominica at a critical moment in time established relationships with the international world community. And so when I see writers or persons who allude to my presence, oh, he was there for a short while, completely forgetting that Rosie Douglas was there for a short while, that Patrick John was a minister, prime minister for 6 months, besides being a premier for 4 years, that Pierre Charles was a minister of government for less than three years thereabout, and so on. We could go on down the list, and trying to just cast me aside as if somebody who just waltzed in and waltzed out with a hurricane on my back. 3 months later. So I thank the caller for recognizing this. And there's so much more that can be said. I'd probably need around 4 hours to say it. But let me just say this too, that as far as I'm concerned, I thought that I've been treated with total disrespect and disregard by the gurus of the land in respect of the job that I was called upon to do at my own risk of my life, and to do it with the best I could, and to actually have a nation having to receive food and housing and other services, including the Royal Bank Housing Scheme, Bath Road, in Bafa State area and so forth, and the various projects that was. Imagine this. The OIS gave us factory shells, 18 factory shells. But when it arrived at the time of Eugenia Charleston government. They left those 18 factory shells to rot outside the stadium. There were 200 houses that was approved by Bank Worms of France for Dominica. The first few houses arrived and they left it alone, and some said about asbestos or something of that sort. But they built some of them in the botanical gardens, but never built the other houses that were available to them. And I could go on and on and on and on. The situation of what I did during Hurricane David, that's why I'm writing a book actually, to explain and give some more detail. So at least my children, my grandchildren will read one day that there was a man called O.J. Seraphine who came to the rescue of his nation in time of need and who serviced and did what he could as a prime minister to feed a nation after a major hurricane. That's all I can say for this now.
Well, thanks a lot for that. I mean, that gives us a little bit of clarity into some of what was transpiring at the time that you became prime minister. It was called interim prime minister at the time. I'm not so sure there is something in the constitution called interim prime minister, but be that as it may, it came out of a situation which I am very familiar with. There's a lot of chaos in the country, and the historians with us, like Dr. Andre and Dr. Thomson Fontaine, can even guide us a lot better as to some of those things they picked up that transpired at the time. I don't, Dr. Fontaine, I don't know whether you want to go first, and then we can go over to Dr. Andre, or you want us to go to, because I'm not sure if you're hearing me right away. So maybe Dr. Andre, let's go with you, and then we'll take Dr. Thomson Fontaine afterwards.
Well, there's no doubt that
then we can go over to Dr. Andre, or you want us to go to.
Yes, certainly. I can go ahead. But I would like to preface my remarks with a question to former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphine. When you took over, Dominica was extremely fractured. I mean, we had this major division in Dominican society. Do you believe, or do you think that in hindsight, things would have turned out differently without the hurricane? Because the hurricane served to bring us in a way together. We were all without roofs over our heads, so to speak, and we all had to bind together. Do you think that in the absence of a hurricane in August of 1979, that things would have turned out differently than they did for Dominica?
The hurricane was taken advantage of insofar as informing the world of our existence. And because of the nature of what we were suffering, the world listened. And therefore, it had an effect upon the international forum in terms of bringing and addressing some of the situations that could assist our country, which came to pass. But let me remind you, you're from Grand Fond. And I have a Grand Fond root. My grandmother was there. She had a bakery in Grand Fond. And my uncles carried half bags of flour, 50-pound block of flour, through the Chimel-Étang. And I recall walking through the Chimel-Étang with my father. He had to carry me most of the time. And so at that point in time, the people from your village were called Contribuki, etc. We had a social problem. We had a social problem in Dominica that was a class problem. Certain people were privileged because of where they were born and where they came from. Today, that has changed, of course. But during that time that you're referring to, as to whether or not, and the question that you asked must be specifically responded to, as to what would have happened had we not got the hurricane. The reality is that the very reason why we had the overthrow of Patrick John to a large extent was a situation of discomfort for a certain class of people that someone like Patrick John could have emerged as the prime minister. There was disrespect for people that came from the countryside. And H.L. Christian, in his book, also makes several references to his experiences in that regard. Today, I am speaking to Dr. Fontaine from Grand Fond. And so do I also treasure the fact that I speak to a number of other doctors from Grand Fond, two of whom or three of whom come from my aunt, the Prince family in Grand Fond, who are medical doctors. One was trained in Russia. That didn't happen prior to those days. It was as a result of the social revolution. I remember I was at the last discussion on that same program, a similar program, when I mentioned the social revolution. And if we do not accept the fact that there have been a social revolution in Dominica that was brought about by LeBlanc, PJ, and myself and others, the reality is that we have lost the understanding about what you talk about, the division. The division is brought about by certain people who were privileged because of opportunity of birth, and others who are disprivileged because of where they came from. And as a result of that, the changes have taken place. We have become involved with a social revolution to the extent that it was complete. My concern, therefore, is this. Why is it there are so many silent persons from, let's say, the medical field or from the legal field or from engineering who took advantage of opportunities that we gave to them? One of which was the Cuban scholarship program. I've heard people trying to take claim for the Cuban scholarship program. Fortunately, the Cuban scholarship was attested to by a magazine that was created by Dr. Dublin and others, which gives attestation to the date and time in which the Cuban scholarship program was enacted. And that was where it began. I remember one person, I believe it was Mackenzie, who said that 2 or 3 things that has stood out for him as being critical in the evolution of development of Dominica. One was the Cuban scholarship program, for which I was directly involved. I did meet Fidel Castro in the 1979 United Nations Assembly, where I was introduced to him because there's a C and D business, and he was C, I was D, I was sitting next to him. And he asked what he could do for me, and we spoke. And through his people, I was sent to the Ambassador Rousseau of Grenada, and through Maurice Bishop, we were able to engage in and create the Cuban scholarship program. At the meeting of NAM, the Non-Aligned Movement, I sent Bernard Wilshire, who was at that time working for UE in Dominica, to act as my person, my surrogate, to act on my behalf. Of course, Rosie Douglas did try to come into the meeting, only to find out that Dominica had already an official representative. So he had no part to play in that particular conference. So we have the Cuban scholarship program, for which quite a number of persons are doctors, quite a number of them are engineers, quite a number of them are architects, and that was taken up during the period by Rosie Douglas and others when I came out of government, and in the period between 80 and 85. Following up on that, we must remember that Eugenia Charles's government, when they came in 1980, refused to accept any Cuban scholarship. They refused to accept anybody coming from Cuba as qualified persons. And in addition to that, it was only when the UWP came in 95, were they allowed to accept scholarships from, and they reintroduced a scholarship program, for which there are quite a number of professionals. But where are their voices? Where are those Dominicans who have been trained and get qualifications in certain areas of importance in our society? What are they doing? They have removed themselves from the mud of Grand Fond and other places, and they have now become the new upper class of Dominica, and they refuse to take part in processing the diversion necessary to bring us to where we are, under which Andre and others are claiming that we have to be. That is to take advantage of our educational opportunity and to implement the ideas that we have through the force of our presence. And that is lacking.
Dr. Thomson Fontaine, I hope that answered the question that you had. So I don't know if you have something else. You can always come in a little bit later on, but I mean, maybe we can go over to Dr. Irving Andre.
There is no doubt that Oliver Seraphine came into power in a difficult, very difficult moment. And there's no doubt that the country was very fractious, very divided at the time. But again, time has a way of erasing memories and so on. The fact of the matter is that there was a serious struggle to gain the upper hand, politically speaking, in the aftermath of the fall of Patrick John. The fact of the matter is that Mr. Seraphine may remember that after Hurricane David, he famously said that he is no longer answerable to the Committee for National Salvation. Mr. Seraphine might remember.
The word was the Committee of National Salvation was blown away by the winds of David. That's what I said.
Well, that's wonderful. But the point of the matter is that from the perspective that you advanced at the time, regardless of the language you used, the sentiment was that you were no longer answerable to community salvation. You may remember that during the 1980 elections, there was a lot of controversy. Eugenia Charles accused, now note the word please, Eugenia Charles accused you of being financed or receiving financial assistance from the US. You may remember that during the campaign, which was a hard struggle, and I'm not here to cast judgment in any fashion, but there were a few controversial developments in terms of the campaign. There was the issuance of the dollars, the OJ dollars, if you remember correctly. Not only that, there was the importing of certain musical groups, such as Big Youth from Jamaica, to host a big concert in Grand Bay. So there were serious allegations that monies, unaccounted for monies, were being spent in those elections. It was a hard-fought battle, and suffice it to say that Eugenia Charles prevailed. But in fairness to you, certainly you are right. It is under the committee, under your administration, that both Bernard Wilshire and Rosie Douglas, in my view, perhaps they haven't been given enough credit for what they did when both of them went to Cuba. And you are absolutely correct that you sent Wilshire. Rosie went almost as an understudy to Forbes Burnham. And Wilshire has given a number of accounts of their meeting with Fidel at the hotel and how they were able to wrest from Fidel concessions with respect to scholarships. So there is no doubt that it is under your watch that vital link, which served such a significant role or played a significant role in Dominica's future development, it was started then. And I certainly agree with those who say that the Cubans for Scholarship program was a significant boost to Dominica's development in ensuing words. Let me make one correction, though. I think you said that it was only with the advent of the UWP government in '95 that the Cuban Scholarship program was reintroduced, or was to that effect. If the wording is incorrect, then I apologize. I think Eugenia had accepted the program long before she departed office in 1992 or 2000. Yeah, 1992. That's right. She had grudgingly accepted it. Yes, she was very hostile to it. Yes, many of the returnees from Cuba had to seek professional employment elsewhere because of that program. Eugenia was a very anti-communist stalwart and crusader at that time. You remember that her role in the Grenada Revolution was primarily by serving to the US as the main custodian against the communist incursion in the Eastern Caribbean. What has not been stated historically, at least not within the context of Dominica in terms of Eugenia Charles, is that after she and Tom Adams, to a lesser degree, gave the US the green light to invade Grenada in 1983, Eugenia received approximately $100,000 from the CIA, which she used to fund the 1985 elections campaign. Now, she's denied that, but there's clear evidence published by Bob Woodward in his book Veil in 1987. In fact, Woodward wrote that not only did she receive that money, which was used to fund an election. But even the speech, the famous speech he gave, um, giving Reagan the green light to go into Grenada, was written by CIA Chief Bob Casey. I'm not sure about the first name, but certainly the last name Casey. So the whole business of fighting communism in the 1980s was Eugenia Charles's main agenda. And I guess one can understand it within the context of the times. She was the victim of an attempted coup in 1981. She had to enact the Treason Act. Many persons seem to forget that pursuant to the Treason Act, many Dominicans of poor origin and background were killed. There were a number of extrajudicial killings. The International Committee for Human Rights, in fact, did a report indicating the number of impoverished young Dominicans who were killed on account of this program against communism and its incursions. So the period was very fractious, was very divided. The fact of the matter is, Oliver Seraphine was approached because he was seen as someone who could probably unite the disparate Labour Party forces and the Freedom Party persons who were waiting in the wings for the 1980 general elections. So that they certainly regarded Oliver Seraphine as somebody who, on a temporary basis, could fill the gap until they could rise triumphant after the 1980 general elections. And that is exactly what happened.
Dr. Fontaine, I know that former Prime Minister Seraphine will want to add something to that, but Dr. Fontaine, before you come in, Prime Minister Seraphine, I just wanted to see if Dr. Fontaine wanted to add anything just so you're going to address it at the same time when you come back on. Dr. Fontaine, when you're hearing me, you can just come right in. So I guess you need a minute to sit at the same time when you come.
Yes, indeed. You know, one of the things that struck me as the former prime minister was talking is the fact when he alluded to the threats against his life, and in particular the direct threat that was made by the Dominica Defense Force personnel. It's interesting to see how that whole thing evolved, because one of the first things that the Prime Minister did Prime Minister Eugenia Charles did when she came into office in 1980 was to disband the police, the Dominica Defense Force, which was considered to be loyal to Patrick John, to Prime Minister Patrick. The whole thing that evolved with the allegations of the former members equipping the dreads in the bushes and so on, exchanging marijuana for guns and so on, and how all of that unraveled. And one can remember the zeal with which they were prepared to kill for the prime minister, and what happened to them. I think it's a good lesson for us. It's a good lesson for the young men who surround the prime minister today and who may not be aware of that history of Dominica, that when you madly rush to protect the prime minister, to maintain his legitimacy to speak, and you attack your own people, you kill your own people, you tear gas your own people, that karma has a way of coming back to get you. And I think it's a very poignant lesson. It's a very telling lesson, because we have some of the same tendencies today in some of the paramilitaries we see around the prime minister, you know, and I'm one of those who believe very strongly that that this particular branch of the police force should be disbanded. What we need is police officers in Dominica, not police officers acting like military men. And that to me is a very powerful lesson. It's one I think that we need to keep stressing, you know, because what we've seen is a tendency for this particular police force and those engaged in this paramilitary part of the police force to be very eager and anxious to unleash lethal force against innocent Dominicans. They've done it time and time again. It was last done on the eve of elections in Dominica, December 18, 2019. So we really have to remember and point to history, and history never fails. But it is interesting to note how much history tends to repeat itself. But I just wanted to insert that as one of the very poignant lessons of that period.
All right, so thanks for that, Thomson. What about you, former Prime Minister Seraphine, your thoughts? You have to turn on your mic, though. Your mic is off.
Thank you, Mr. G, for bringing me back in. I think I owe the doctor his. I'm talking about our friend, the historian, Irvin Andre, some more information that could be useful for him in his archives. There is a copy of the OJ dollar, which I'd like to present to him and send to him by email through you. I guess I could do that. And it says very clearly.
Sorry. I actually have about 10 of them.
Okay. And if you look at the bottom of it, it will say not to be exchanged except for relief goods. And we have to go back to what caused it to be so. What was the purpose of the OJ dollar? It was based upon the fact that we were receiving supplies of assistance, which was very aggressively sought. And among the other areas that we found some difficulty was that there was a stop on the amount of goods that's supposed to come in through the chairman of the food desk, Charles Sovereign. And there was a blockage on the basis that the food supplies that we were getting is being used for political purpose. There was a meeting of the United States officials, and among the things that we concluded after about a night's meeting at Springfield was that they are opposed to giving free food because, according to Sovereign, when he made his promotion to this institution, USAID, was that the private sector is closed because people are buying food, are receiving food for free, and are unable to buy from the private sector. Consequently, it was agreed that there would have been a work for food program, that persons on the task forces throughout Dominica, Marigot, and Casarous, and you name it, Portsmouth, would be given the responsibility to have persons engaged in practical exercises of reconstruction. They would then come under an administrative process where on a weekly basis, if it's a carpenter or mason or laborer, they get paid in the coupons, and those coupons would then be given in keeping with the cost of the goods that they'd be receiving. And it went to the extent that we would give building materials to commensurate for the OJ dollar. Suffice it to say that these coupons, it was coupons that were being given for like food stamps. Unfortunately, where they were stored at the Canefield Airport, Canefield Stadium, was broken, entered into, and we were able to use the program that was already in place as a result of that coordinated approach that the Americans agreed to have with us. On the question of Big Youth was a very popular band out of Jamaica, together with Tambu Combo, for which persons who wanted to have a desire to communicate with me on a level of confidence, past business associates, because prior to my being in government, I had businesses. I had an airline, Air Martinique, and I had Clint Aero of St. Thomas, who flew in and threw pamphlets in the valleys of Roseau and in St. Joseph and other parts of Dominica, and who contributed to having to bring down Big Youth and Tabu Combo. Because listen, to win an election, you must have a paraphernalia of support. That's what I was saying to somebody who said that they wanted to know about this thing about Al Jazeera. I said it will take a long time to explain, because you don't win an election by Tumble D or Jumble G. You got to come up with money to be able to run an election. And that same situation also prevailed in I think it was 1985, when Mike Douglas became the leader of the party. By then, I had an engagement with the French government. The French government was very supportive of me. I can't go into details as to how they supported me in 1980, but I'm suggesting to you that they had linkages with the French government because of their concern about certain developments that was affecting the relationships that they had with Guadeloupe and Martinique through the independent movement, which you probably know about. And certain people came to me and decided to give me some support in that area. So in 1985, after just coming from a trip from Guadeloupe, where I met certain important persons who were going to contribute to the campaign of 85, there was a situation that came up in Maho where there's a change of leadership. And I will leave it there because that will take too long to explain. But suffice it to say that we received assistance for Big Youth and also for Tabu Combo to run the elections. In 1995, Rosie Douglas, on his very last week or the last 10 days of the campaign, did approach me and say, listen, he's trying to have to pull his hair because there are persons who are coming to him with the need for certain campaign support, etc., to pay for trucks and buses and whatnot, which he cannot sustain. If I could get back to my friends and see what they can do, which I did. And somebody called Ronaldo Jonta arrived in Dominica and presented, within a week, presented a check of some $80,000 US. And that check was taken to Antigua, by which Julian Giro, who has passed away, made available to the Hadids there. They were able to change the check, and he was able to come back with cash to assist Rosie Douglas. In 2000, when Rosie Douglas again was having some difficulties with his campaign, he approached me on this again. And I found somebody who was able to contribute $30,000 US to the campaign to buy fuel from the Royal Texaco Company. And we received coupons that Afi Martin and Pierre Charles was able to be responsible for, to give to the truckers and to bus drivers, etc. And there was a $10,000 that was also given to the gas station in Wesley for the purpose, West Indies oil or West Indies gas station, for the purpose of assistance. So the business about having money and the Freedom Party talking about, oh, I had an OJ dollar and all of that foolishness, and that I had, in fact, left the treasury empty. Fontaine reported in the last time that he spoke in this particular forum that the situation of the finances of Dominica was not in such a bad strait following the hurricane in Dominica. I will say further, too, that in fact and indeed, the hurricane situation brought about a largesse to Dominica, to the extent that at the meeting in Barbados under Willie Dimas, of which contributions were committed to, that the entire structure of roads throughout Dominica, be it from Roseau to Port Cassé, from Port Cassé to Marigot to Portsmouth, etc., all the different countries contributed and committed to those road networking for reconstruction, which Eugenia Charles enjoyed after I left office. Let me say this, though, that Eugenia Charles actually set up a commission of inquiry into the various allegations of financial mismanagement of my government. And they came up with empty hands, to the extent that they offered, what's his name, Felix Thomas, a sum of money to give evidence, if he could, on matters that he may know that they have not been able to find out. So I came out of that situation where I was charged with leaving an empty treasury. But mark you, the election was in July. The end of our economic cycle for funds to be expended was the end of 30th of June. So by July, the treasury would be empty anyway. So how could it be empty when I'm a prime minister? I'm not a financial secretary. I'm not the accountant general. So how was the money being spent? At the time I'm talking about, there was a very consistent, regulated system under the Westminster system that said that all money comes and goes into the treasury. and controlled and managed by the financial secretary and the accountant general. So to go in there and say that there was a mismanagement of funds, again, there was a report, and if Justice Andre would be kind enough to find out from the people who were involved, which is, I think, Blanchard and Ozzy Luis and others from the accountant, the income tax department, if that could be found out, where is that document? What is the report like? There's a report. But they hit that report because they found me not guilty of any of the charges. I rest my case.
Yes, and Dr. Andre, thanks a lot for that. And I mean, it's good to see a lot of this information that is coming out is very, very useful indeed. Dr. Andre, your thoughts and your comments? Your mic?
Yes, the point though that that Mr. Seraphine is missing, because it is very relevant today, is the financing of elections from funds, external funding. That's the problem. That's the mischief, because we're seeing it today. We're seeing it today in the most obscene fashion. I don't dispute that Mr. Seraphine was able to get funding from the French or from whatever international organizations, but surely he can see that that is the essence of the problem that we face today. That is the genesis of the problem. He doesn't have to convince me that Rosie himself received external help, even with Mr. Seraphine's assistance. In fact, Rosie told on a Canadian newspaper reporter in 2000 that he received help from the Libyans to win in 1985. Rosie admitted to more than one person, and more than one of Rosie's closest circles told me that he received significant funds from Libya coming from England and Barbados. I don't dispute that. But the fact of the matter is that is one of the main corrupting influences of general elections today. Well, not just today, since 2009, because the fact of the matter is unbridled foreign funds in elections have a corrupting influence on local elections. This is not some esoteric legal doctrine I'm trying to impose on the people. It's a matter of common sense, and that is the fundamental point being made here. That is the point. And we are paying a huge and heavy price for the fact that there's the political directorate believe that they can get any amount of funding, irrespective of where it comes from, whether the sale of passports, whether from those who receive diplomatic passports. Remember a famous lawyer a few years ago told us about this lady who brought $400,000 and she received her diplomatic passport at the airport, and what that $400,000 was used for? To finance one party's electoral bid. That is the problem.
Yes, can you take a quick call here, Dr. Andre?
Sure.
Yes, the caller, well, I think the caller just left. He's there twice and just left. So
Yeah, right.
He's back there. Hold on. Caller, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm listening to the program, right? And I know Dr. Andre, them guys, they're brilliant. Dr. Andre is a brilliant fella. But he made certain statements, and O.J. Seraphine, the former Prime Minister, is setting the record straight. Now he's coming back now and turning around and trying to make it look strong like you don't expect a Dr. Seraphine to stay there and talking about this campaign financing. That's not, to me, that's not the issue. The issue is here it is, Dr. O.J. Seraphine is setting the record straight because of certain things that were said by Dr. Andre. I know them guys are bright. They write history, they do all kind of stuff. But the man is there right now, setting the record straight. And he's coming to talk about the man don't have to convince him. Never convincing him. He's setting the record straight. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure what the caller means by setting the record straight. I'm not sure what he means by that at all. The fact of the matter is that I am telling you exactly what the situation was with respect to the funding of campaign of electoral politics and so on. You may not like it. Mais ça fait do if you don't like it. The fact of the matter is the main difficulty we have is the importation of foreign money into the electoral process. That is something which goes back a significant period of time, and that is one of the worst problems that we as a democratic nation face today. If you don't like me to set that record straight, garçons a fait ça.
Yes, yes, Woji.
Yeah, well, I mean, frankly, campaign finance reform is naturally expected as a matter of urgency. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Because whether we like it or not, at the end of the day, there is going to be a need for financing of a campaign. Every campaign costs money. You have to be able to have t-shirts, and you have PA systems, you have transportation, you have pamphlets, you have a manifesto, you have all of that. It doesn't come cheap. And I must add to this that every party has to find its way to get the basic minimum in order to make itself visible. However, it is understood right now that there has no organized, structured campaign reform that would benefit both sides equally. So that's a matter to be addressed. And how do we go about it? I would imagine that the sages among us here will find ways and means to come up with an idea that can stick and become real. Because let us be honest, whether you be in the United States of America or Canada or Europe or wherever you may be, one of the criteria for being able to be visible as a candidate and even to be taken legitimately as a candidate is your ability to raise funds for a campaign. That happens in America all the time. There's nothing new here. Question for me would be, how do we go about doing it legitimately, properly, and with respect for the democratic process that would ensure that there's an equal opportunity for each and every candidate on either side of the political divide? I mean, that is where we are. And how do we go about it? And I think that's a question we must ask ourselves.
So can we make a suggestion then, which I think we've done on this show before? If the state, if for example, the Electoral Commission became a bona fides body that truly, represented an independent institution under the Constitution, not just 3 people or 4 people or 5, 2 people from that side, 2 on the other side, another one by that side. If you had a number of people representing civil society, major institutions that were impartial, you don't really need to have representatives of political parties on it. But if you put them there, they should be in a small minority. Independent thinkers and people who are really qualified should be on that, who can be impartial, who just want to see free and fair elections. And if such a body were to exist, I believe the state could make certain funds. Let us take $1 million as a figure. So let's make $1 million available to the Electoral Commission. And they said, okay, you're going to have to divide that among the political parties, the bona fides political parties. If it's 3 of them, maybe you give them each of them 1/3, depending on whatever formula that you're going to use. But the fact is that the state gives them this money, and they would then have to account for the use of this money. And they may be allowed to accept money from outside, but a certain amount, and not too much. And they have to ensure that they cannot accept more than a certain amount from any one party who could influence them when they became the government. In other words, in trying to create a situation that would level the playing field, so no one political party has any tremendous advantage over the other in having a largesse of money that is really unaccounted for. But Lambi, let's take a call if you like to before we go on.
Yes, on the overseas line, the caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. Again, prior protocol established stipulated to. I see two problems here. The first problem is that Dominicans The average Dominican does not necessarily fund campaign. They don't. And the second thing is the foreign money tends to pervert the process in that it gives undue advantage to the person who can raise the most funds. Now, locally, you will find that certain business people or so will be able to put a certain amount of money. The less fortunate persons who don't have that money. When you get to office, whose interests are you serving? Is it that the people, the power of the people, have now been surrendered, and those persons who actually literally paid for the election now control the thing, as is what is happening now, and not only in Dominica, but in most parts of the world. But the most disturbing thing is that you will find in other countries sometimes people may contribute a $5, a $20, but you have a little, let's say you have a meeting, a motorcade or something. When the people come, you must pay their passage on the bus, and you must buy them food, and you must buy them drink. So there has to be some kind of compromise that determines, for example, okay, the government will put, if you raise 10,000, the government will give you 10,000, period. And so I think that should be a kind of equalizer in the whole issue. Other than that, because as we know, Dominican, the less fortunate, the poorer on the bus don't fund no campaign. It is the big businessmen that put the money there, and when the politicians go there, it's their interest they're going to serve. They're not going to serve the interests of the mass of the people. So the people's power has been permanently transferred from them to the politicians, when in fact the people should always maintain their power. But that is my view. I don't know how what the panel thinks on it, but that's how I see it. Thank you.
I would certainly endorse Mr. Louis, the caller's opinion, because in fact Jamaica actually has a program analogous to what the caller is suggesting. You cannot have unrestricted foreign money in an election because it creates imbalance. It destroys free and fair election. There has to be a middle ground. There has to be some limitations. This is not, as I said, a legal question. It's a matter of common sense. If you are running against somebody who can raise $1,000 for a little association head, and you can only raise 20, it stands to reason that in all likelihood you will lose big time because the person will outspend you. And therein lies a problem. And that is why all countries that have tried to address electoral reform have implemented restrictions with respect or limitations on campaign finance reform. That is precisely the point being made. No, I'm not saying that there should be no infusion. I mean, if someone from the diaspora, for example, contributes anonymously, there's nothing wrong with that. But there has to be a balance between the contending parties, because otherwise, quite frankly, the results would be preordained, which is exactly what has happened in Dominica over the last 15 years.
Yes, of course. And then really and truly, I know, Dr. Fontaine, I'm sure that you're still with us. I hope your internet is behaving a little better now. I'm pretty sure that you would like to make a contribution to the whole question of campaign finance reform. Because even on this program, we've studied this, and Dr. Andre has made a tremendous contribution, a lot of work looking at the Jamaica model and all the other models in the region. That is, that's why you can speak with so much authority on what's happening in Jamaica. There is accountability. So Dr. Thomson Fontaine, you might want to come in as soon as you hear me, and then come in and make some comments as you wish on the whole question of campaign finance reform, because obviously that is an issue that we're going to have to contend with. As soon as you get.
No, absolutely, and thank you for that. Dr. Andre is absolutely correct. This, it lends a certain level of distortion to the process, those foreign monies, and we must find a way as a young democracy to deal with this issue, because it will mean that because of this unchecked amount of money is coming in. I believe in Barbados, for example, you're limited to a certain amount per constituency, so that depending on the size of your constituency, you cannot spend beyond a certain amount. There are different models across the globe. The Jamaica model is a good one as well. In the US, for example, monies are given by the federal government to the parties to run the election, and there are limits and controls on how much they can access. So I think there are models that we can look at. But importantly for us as a small country that could be easily corruptible, we have to find a way to introduce campaign finance reform. And that should be a part of the process of the clean of the electoral list and the reforms that we are talking about. It has to be part of it.
Well, yes, clearly. And let's take a call, Lambi. I think you have one or two people who want to make a contribution to this.
Yes, yeah. The call on the overseas line, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. And good evening, Lambi and Mr. G.
Yes, clearly.
Fontaine,
Let's take a call, Lambi. I think you have
good
one or two
evening,
people who
everybody.
want to make a contribution to this.
On the issue of finance campaign reform.
Yes, good evening. And good
Lambi, you hear me?
I'm here.
Yes, we are having some feedback from Fontaine. So,
Yeah.
Hello?
Go ahead, caller now. You're in the clear.
Yeah, I was saying, Lambi, in the when it comes to the issue of campaign finance, I think that is an issue we have to be very careful. I think there should be a limit as to how much money one should accept or how much money one is allowed to donate or to give. And then the most important part of it is that you should declare where this money is coming from. Because in the US, there are laws where the government or the state could give you money. But I remember when Obama was run, he refused the money from the state because he knew he could raise more than what he could get. So that's a very a very serious problem. But I think there are ways we could solve it. And Dr. Fontaine was talking about the defense force, and that is something that come across my mind, because I was saying if the UWP was to take reign in Dominica, I would ask them to disband the hierarchy of the police force. You know, that come across my mind, because these guys, they are not, they take an oath, but they are not upholding the law and the constitution where they should be loyal to, instead of a party politics or individual or prime minister, whoever. And I think in Dominica, if the UWP was to come in power, first thing I would advise them to do is dismantle the hierarchy of the Dominican police force, because they are politicians and political guru doing the work of politicians. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that, Lambi. If you don't have another call, we'll just move on, because I think we're really getting time to, it's time to wind down. I mean, everybody has to go to work tomorrow. I feel a little sorry for Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I mean, he has to go to work in a short while. And so I know he's not going to get much sleep at all. Probably has maybe an hour to get some rest before he goes to work. But former Prime Minister Seraphine, let me go back to you. I believe you wanted to make one or two further comments on any of this there. You might want to turn on your mic. Your mic is off.
First of all, we must understand clearly that what Irvin Andre did make mention of was that you're kaput if you do not have funding for an election. And I guess in another forum I'll explain some aspect of that. However, it is an imperative that the idea that you can go against you can go as an opposition against a government that is yielded in such a way that finances have been spent with such abundance, if you want to put it that way, because of the availability of such cash, and the opposition have nothing because their contacts that they could have developed over a period of time may not have brought them the necessary support for an election. Maybe some concern here that opposition parties have to cultivate certain connections in order to get some benefits out of financing from the external area, as well as the party itself has to be able to have fundraising of its own kind. And then you call in on the states now to make a contribution, which gives them at least a chance of being part of a democratic process. These are things to be considered. I think there should be some kind of forum to discuss just that in its totality and stretch it to the limit where it can be implemented. Otherwise, we are not really understanding the clarity of why a political party fails to emerge in an election cycle. My thinking here is this, that away from all of what we are talking about, we as persons of some level of vision and independence and capacity and so on. I know that you, Sheridan, have done several businesses in Dominica, and you had to give up on most of them. Fortunately, you held on to this one, which gives us a chance to talk about matters of concern to the nation. That could be said of Gordon Henderson, who came and left as well, or our friend Shillingford, who is very much on your program, who came and left as well. And that could be said of several Dominicans who have tried different things that they failed to achieve. You mentioned Paul Pastoroni and other people like that. The question for me really is this, that we need to create an environment whereby it does not matter whether you belong to a political party or not, but the idea that you are coming to the table with is what is the imperative. I recall in 1995, I received a letter in the mail appointed me as chairman of the National Development Corporation by the UWP. At the time, I never expressed any UWP aspiration or support, but the leadership of the UWP felt that with the experiences that I've had as a prime minister and as a permanent member of the NDC board, having been appointed by the Hotel Association and the Eco Insights and Services Organization, a small hotel, that I represented them on the board. And it was felt that with that experience, that I was made the chairman at a time when we had the most eminent people on board. You included, Mr. Gregoire. And there were people like Mrs. Amor, there were people like our friend at the Pascal of the Afwawi, and we had, our gentleman Gabriel from Coca-Cola, and we had some very impressive people, Warrington, El Carter, and so on, represent the union movement. And among all these very impressive persons with credentials, I was made the chairman, not as a member of the United Workers' Party. Let me make that fundamentally clear. But as someone that was thought to have the capacity to become part of a program of development. And so it was with amusement I received a letter one day, which I don't think I ever shared with Mr. G, was a letter which came in from the press secretary, Alexander. And it was a copy of a newspaper clipping where the Prime Minister of Grenada was saying that boards are to be boards and not usurp the authority of cabinet, because at that time we were making a lot of news, and you in particular, Mr. G, was facing the press constantly of different developments, including the Creole Festival, the Festival Commission, the trip to France, I believe it was Deauville, where we brought in 60 artisans and so forth. And we were constantly in the news. The first time the American Eagle came in and was doing a regular flight out of Puerto Rico, for which I was given the opportunity to act on behalf of the government and so on, to cut the ribbon in Puerto Rico. And we were doing things that were empirical. For example, we did the World Heritage Site, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we did several other things, one of which was the investment organization, the name slips me right now, which you might probably help me with, which was an intention to get Dominicans on the diaspora to make contributions into that fund so they could invest in local business. And so we were aspiring to become very effective representing the interests of the average man on the street. So in my case, I came up with Dominica Airways. I came up with the Sand Project at Layu, for which I was kicked out. The housing project at Marigot, you name it, proposal for the expansion of the port services and other such thing. Of course, Floral Gardens, which became recognized as being an international place where it represented the eco aspects of our development. Eugenia Charles gave me an award, I got national awards, etc. built from my hands. And then people were saying, oh, it's money that he got from the same O.J. Dollar and all of that. My children suffered immensely. They were treated with such abuse by their own peers and what have you. One daughter of mine, for example, was told that she was in a situation where she was given false information that her father was the one who introduced the St. Andrews High School, which I did. And the teacher lamented that it was Eugenia Charles, who actually came a year after the school was open. And she left Dominica and never came back and doesn't want to be back. So I'm saying that we went through periods where our own efforts have not been recognized. Those of us who have sought to do business in our country, have not been treated with the respect that we deserve. And I think that's where the turnaround comes in. The ideological difference must be clear. What is the difference between the two political parties? When I became a Labourite, I became a Labourite because Libla had spoken about the Beach Ordnance Act. He had spoken about the aliens land holding license. These are things that I thought were Dominican oriented for the people of our country. Now I hear that Chinese are buying everywhere and this and that and the other and so forth. So we have to understand what kind of ideological difference does the political parties bear and how do they make it extremely attractive for persons who share a similar conscience as far as development is concerned, is made very, very credible and very, very, very much in the eyes of the public.
Yeah, well, thank you for those. I would probably ask Dr. Fontaine to maybe try to give us his final thoughts and maybe do his closing remarks here, because I know he has to get to bed soon and we have to get to bed as well. So I want to ask Dr. Fontaine, as soon as you can hear me, to come in and give us your final thoughts on all of this, because we are in fact trying to wind down on what we set out to do initially, which is look at the lives and legacies and leadership of some of our past political leaders. And tonight we zeroed in to some extent.
I appreciate the consideration. I'm now blurry-eyed and ready to collapse almost. But listen, I want to come full circle. It was a very interesting discussion, but the question that we started asking ourselves today was, so what is the future of the citizenship program and the implications for Dominica? And it's very sobering. I took a quick look at some of the government figures for last year, and it turns out that our tax revenue, what the economy of Dominica gives us by way of tax collections, which is how most countries finance their budgets, it's only 46% of spending, about $350 million. We spend $110 million on debt repayments. The CBI was 41% of that expenditure. So what that tells me effectively is that if tomorrow or in a year's or 2 years' time we were to lose the CBI money, then we have a serious problem. It means we will not be able to service our debts. It means that we will not be able to pay our public servants, and forget about any type of capital spending. We simply would not have enough money. And that is what we've been telling this government. That's the reason why we've been begging, we've been pleading. Please use these windfalls that you're getting from the sale of passports to invest in the economy so that the economy can be self-regenerated. It can regenerate itself over and over again. It can expand, it can increase, the private sector can be encouraged so that tax revenues can grow, because tax revenue is sustainable over time. Now we are facing the very real prospect that these CBI revenues are going to come to an end. Then we're in serious trouble. I don't know how this economy is going to survive in the absence of CBI monies. I mean, 36% of your spending is from tax revenues. That is a serious shortfall. It means if the CBI revenue disappears, you have to be borrowing 70% of your spending to maintain your current levels. And that's not sustainable. You would quickly run out of, your debt levels would rise so quickly that it would simply cause the whatever collapse economy to collapse even further. So, it's probably not too late. As from my last calculations, we still have billions of dollars out there. the program will not necessarily end tomorrow. So there is still some space for making some money. I will again appeal to the government of Dominica to invest in the sustainable part of the Dominican economy, invest in agriculture, revamp the coconut fields, revamp the banana estates, revamp the citrus crops, invest in 2 or 3 manufacturing plants that can grind and crush and bottle and pickle our fruits and vegetables, invest in water production, do things that are sustainable so that when the revenue from the CBI ends, the country will be able to sustain itself. That is the appeal I would like to make to the government of Dominica. It's an appeal I've been making every time I have the chance over the past 15, 20 years. And I will make it again tonight because probably now that the writing is about to appear on the wall, they may in fact take action. So that's what I would like to leave our listeners with, and of course the policymakers in Dominica, that now is the time. If there was ever a time, now is the time to invest in the productive sectors of Dominica and to ensure that our economy survives and that the people of Dominica in fact get a fair chance.
And we've also
Thank you, Mr. G, for the opportunity. Honorable
and,
Seraphine and Honorable Andre, it's been a pleasure. And Slamby, thanks as well. And to all of the listeners, thank you so much for listening. I'll be back on the radio actually on Thursday on the program, on the Workers' Voice program. We'll be talking a lot more about the Ukraine situation and about this issue of the CBI program. So you can join us then.
yes, and Thomson, I don't want you to forget one other area of investment because
A lot more about the Ukraine situation.
there is a gentleman called Dr. I.P. Pascal. He has been, for years, he has been pleading about the natural plants that we have, the natural herbs and spices, and he has singled out cannabis as one of the industries because we know that we can process the oils, extract the oils from cannabis, whether cold compressed or heat compressed. And we know that every pharmacy that you go to in North America, you will see is a cannabis medicinal products, and these are expensive stuff. And so there's windfalls coming in from countries like Canada, certain states in the United States, and certain islands in the Caribbean, St. Vincent, Jamaica, and all of them. They're making windfalls. Frankly, I think some of that should be given serious consideration. There is this product there, and I don't really recommend it for smoking and so on, but I certainly recommend it as health products, as medicinal products. And I believe the extracts from that could make excellent medicinal products. And the big pharmacies around North America and worldwide are telling us that is in fact the case, and they're selling them. They have big plaques saying that we sell cannabis medicinal products. I just want to go over to Dr. Andre before I go back to Prime Minister Seraphine to make his final comments. I wanted to go over to Dr. Andre to see whether he wanted to make some final comments about. This will not be a closing remark, but just some final comments on where we started off with the CBI program and what we should be doing. You see, we've come full circle and we're saying, now that we're confronted with all these problems, what can we do now? Turn on your mic, Dr. Andre.
That's a great question. We might have to go back to first principles. I mean, after Carnival, there is a period of fasting, isn't there, before Easter? And many of us, we refrain from drinking any Maho whiskey until Easter, Sunday or Monday or something along those lines. But the essence of that parable of the prodigal son is the person who wasted his resources, who spent it lavishly on friends, on drink, on ladies of the night, whether from Macau or from Vanuatu. And he had to come home empty-handed. And all those so-called friends living in Gucci luxury abandoned him. That is the dilemma. That is the sad reality that we face today when we think of the CBI funds. Every indication, and Thomson probably knows much better than I, that the majority of those funds generated do not find their way into the consolidated fund. They go into private coffers. They go into concrete Trojan horses which lay empty, while persons cannot get $1,000 by way of stimulus payments. The state is sinking under the weight of its debt. The people are becoming impoverished, despite the fact that there's wealth generated and wealth creating fabulous millionaires or wealth among a select few. And the question is, what do we do to reverse course? We have to go back to first principles if we're serious. We have to ask ourselves, and Mr. Seraphine made reference to some of the legislation enacted by Edward Oliver LeBlanc, the Aliens Landholding Act, the Beach Control Act, legislation designed to empower Dominicans to make them masters of their own domain, to make sure that the enabling environment, the nurturing environment he talked about, is created to enable people to become successful. Wasn't it yesterday that you celebrated the extraordinary life of someone called Suki Winston?
That's
Who,
right.
by dint of the sweat of his brow, was able to get involved in so many businesses and created wealth so that he can stand back and feel honest and happy that he did it through honest toil rather than getting benefits that others did not get? Isn't that the ideal? Isn't that the gold standard that we aspire towards? Making people aware of their own potential to generate wealth, to become self-reliant, and to employ persons, and to lift up the coffers of the state, and to lift up their children, and to lift up themselves. Isn't that the gold standard we aspire to embrace? And in my view, that is what we should be embracing. We shouldn't embrace the cold touch of becoming a pariah state. But that goal lies within the breasts and the chests and the hearts of every Dominican. And one hope that one day Dominicans, the majority of Dominicans, will embrace the little kings and queens within their beating hearts and make us sure that we will embrace a brighter Dominica than we can look forward to today.
Dr. Andre, I'll come back to you to say goodnight in a minute, but I wanted to just go over to, we run out of time, so I wanted to go over to former Prime Minister Seraphine to say his goodnight and his goodbyes, just wind up, and then I'll probably ask Dr. Thomson Fontaine, although he seemed to have said a kind of goodnight and goodbye a while ago, I still wanted him to say goodnight properly to all our listeners. So I'll come back to Dr. Fontaine as soon as you're done, former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphine. Let me go over to you now. You want to turn on your mic if it's off.
Yeah, Sheridan. So I am writing. One of the things I said, which sort of fits into just what our dear friend Justice Andre said. So I write, all men inevitably has only a fleeting presence on this earth, as he seeks to find comfort in his own self-worth, his destiny to mold like the potter's clay, and his legacy by the creation of his dream or vision. Hence, no man has a right of authority over the other one, a destiny, and they have a destiny and are equal beings in the eyes of the Almighty God. And all should be seen through the lens of his own vulnerabilities. We are flesh born to serve God through his Holy Spirit. And as we all are equal men of the Creator, we are born for a purpose which is equal in his eyes. And to find the purpose he has destined us to be is the core of our existence. So to thy own self be true. These are my thoughts as far as the final comments I'd like to make. I am charged with the thinking that there is so much unsaid, but at the end of the day, we owe it to the young people. As John Maxwell, a leadership guru, quote, has said, and I quote, the children, the young people, they like to feel special, so sincerely compliment them. They want a better tomorrow, so show them hope. They desire direction, so navigate them. They are selfish, so speak to their needs. They get low emotionally, so encourage them. They want success, so help them. So I'm saying those things to say that If all that we are at the tail end, possibly, if that is in fact the case, of the Economic Citizenship Program or CBI, Citizenship by Investment, if that is the case, then if we have to harness the funds that's remaining, my suggestion would be that we focus a lot on the ideas of youth, the vision of youth. To go back to the system that was creating the Labour Party in the days of my time of government, the cooperative movement, that the lands that belong to the government in Wesley and in Woodford Hill and other such places, the lands that have been taken over by persons who clearly had advantage because of their political connections. If such lands, for example, the lands of Silma, Dupini, and Vanya Dupini down at Portsmouth, which remains fallow, and all the estates that remain fallow, if you do just like what I did when I was in government, when we acquired Mount Prosper Estate, Watton Waven, Soufriere, Layu, Trafalgar, distributed lands of the government in Glogomie and in Tefem, and in the Kayambuk in Marigot, the lands, the government lands in Wesley Heights, which was distributed, most of that during the time I was in government. In fact, I would like to challenge anyone to find any other minister of agriculture or prime minister who was able to acquire more lands and distribute more lands than I did. So I'm saying this as a challenge. And so I said, this is where we have to go back to find a way to attach the youth to the land, that the schools system should incorporate agriculture in such a way that when they come off school, even from a technical college, that a certain amount of land is given to them through cooperatives, so that you could then harness the group organizations in order to establish the ability to earn and to give them the means by which they could do so by PPP, private-public partnerships. We need to now expand our vision. We need to call upon the Dominicans abroad in the various disciplines, in the diaspora, children of Dominicans out overseas who happen to have knowledge in different areas of career. For example, in my own family, we have an MBA daughter of mine who is right now at the very top of the Ritz-Carlton chain of hotels. I have a daughter who is also managing in sales in the Ritz-Carlton chain of hotels. I have a niece who is right at the top of the program for money exchange, that is Express, American Express, who is a vice president of American Express. All these people together, all our family members. Sheridan, you have somebody who is at the heights of the establishment in St. Croix in the technological field. We all have children and family members in diverse parts of the world who could contribute to Dominica. We need to encourage them, and we need to seek them out. We need to find a way to place them at a point of view where they could be into a brain spool that could contribute to the welfare and the contribution to the development of our country.
Well, and thank you for that, OJ. Appreciate that. Thomson, if you're hearing me already, I just wanted to give you a final opportunity to just wrap up and say goodnight and so on. So before I go over Dr. Andre, so as soon as you can hear me, just go right ahead. Appreciate that, Thomson.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. G. And let me end by thanking Honorable former Prime Minister O.J. Seraphine for his service to Dominica. He stepped up at a time when the country was fractured, a lot of social upheaval and turmoil. And as a very young man at the time, was able to step in and lead the country at probably one of its most difficult times. And following, of course, the second whammy, following May 29, the second whammy of August 29, 1979. It was a very difficult time. But I thank him for his service. I thank him for standing for Dominica and for everything that he's done, and for continuing even today to put forward ideas and things that can really help the country. The idea of reaching out to this tremendous pool of talented Dominicans who are out there that can help build a model island is something that any future government must embrace. We have too much talent, too much brilliant people, both in and outside of Dominica, who are longing who are willing and who are able to contribute to our development. And we should make a very special effort to reach out to them. The youth, of course, are special. The youth, after all, they're the ones who are going to chart the way for the future, and how we deal with them, how we embrace them, how we bring them in to decision making and into contributing to the island will certainly set the pace and set the stage for the future of Dominica. Our future is bright, no doubt. We should not despair because before CBI, we had the land. After CBI, we have the land. So we have the resources. Before CBI, we had the geothermal energy, we had the natural resources, we had the human resource. After CBI, we will have the human resource, we will have the natural resources, we will have the same ingredients, the same resources, the same factors that require to build a country that is the envy of the world. So I'm not daunted, I'm not phased, I'm not discouraged by the moves to put an end to a program that the world feel is a problem for their security and for its safety. After all, we should all be upstanding citizens of the world and we should care about the safety of the world. So if the world is moving to act in the best interest of its own security, we can only support that. But at the end of the day, I think we have to do what's within our power to build a better Dominica, to build a Dominica that caters not only for one group or for one clique, but for all of Dominica. I think, it's time we begin to think about Dominica in the broadest sense of Dominica, like everybody being meaningful, everybody having a purpose, every single Dominican being valued. Let us begin to value every single Dominican. Prime Minister Odi Seraphine talked about the notion of contribuki and social status and social class. It's time we think of ourselves as just a Dominican people that can work together with varied talents, with varied gifts, with everybody having something to contribute. So let us embrace each other. Let us care for each other. Let us move beyond the lines of politics that so easily divide us. And let us work together to build a Dominica that is better, a Dominica that ultimately will be the envy of the rest of the world. That's my final word for Dominica tonight. And I want to thank all of you who are listening for the many comments on Facebook as well. Thank you so much. And to all of you, God bless Dominica. And let us continue to be strong. Let's remember the people of Ukraine at this time and say a prayer that this war will soon be over and that we can come back to a peaceful world. Thank you.
And thank you, Thompson. Thanks a lot. I hope you have a good night's rest, or well, a good 1 hour rest because you're probably in the morning already. But I just wanted before I go over to Dr. Andre, I just wanted to comment on something that Thompson said. But Thompson, some politicians have a way with words. And the former Prime Minister Oliver J. Seraphine, he knows his wife is listening. Hi, Lily, how you doing? So, and he knows she's listening. So he says, Lily, all the pain and suffering I caused you and the family over the years, is Sheridan Gregoire came right at my home and tell me the Committee for National Salvation want him to head the interim government. The man just put all the blame on me. So he's saying to Lily, boy, it's not me that wanted that, it's Sheridan that came and got you. So anyway, Lily, I want to ask your forgiveness for that if you really believe it. But Oji, thanks a lot for being here. And really thanks for your service to country. Dr. Andre, I want to give you the final word.
Yes, let me say good evening. And before I start, let me thank the panelists, Dr. Fontaine, Dr. Honorable Seraphine, Mr. G, Brother Lambie. And it's good that we can sit down and engage in honest debate. We should never be fearful of having divergent views with anyone, as long as we can debate civilly without going at each other's throats and without telling people that if he knocks on your door, literally or proverbially, you should throw hot water on him. That is the essence of democracy. And if we are the ones who have to remind our listeners that that is, in fact, what democracy is all about, then we will gladly assume that task. Dominica's future, if I may borrow a metaphor from Elton John, is not like a candle blowing in the wind, a candle which will go out at any time. It is more like the perpetual flame, the perpetual fire that burns in the National Heroes Park in America. It is the perpetual fire which burns in front of the Parliament building in Canada. It is the perpetual fire that remains alight within the castle of our hearts. It is that which gives us hope. It is that which gives us joy. It is that which gives us the power to dream of a better future, and most importantly, to work towards that future. And we have to always remember that within each of us, this power of light, the light which symbolizes everything which is good, which is honorable, everything which is worth pursuing, and everything which is worth embracing, that power remains within us. And as long as that power exists, the future is there, for us to mold. Mr. Seraphine quoted a poem, To Thine Own Self Be True, that ironically was one of the famous poems embraced by Edward Oliver LeBlanc. And to the extent that we, even if we could not articulate it as eloquently as Honorable Seraphine, but we can still embrace what it means, there is always hope for a better Dominica. So I am one of those who dream of a better Dominica, and I hope you do too. Thank you and good night to all our listeners.
And yes, and thank you so much, everyone, for this. I mean, a tremendous contribution here tonight. We started off talking about the imminent threat that we seem to have from this, what these developed countries are doing about this visa-free travel thing. It's obviously creating issues for them. So it's obvious that they're going to clamp down on it as much as they can. Dominica, we as Dominica need to prepare ourselves for it. We know it's coming. And I do not think we can continue being just having these divisions and this animosity. And I think Thomson Fontaine is right. We need to come together as a unified country. Maybe one day we will see a government of national unity so that there are no sides. You know, everybody's speaking in one voice and taking action, concerted action to do the things that we recommended here tonight, to really build your economy. I mean, diversify the economy, strengthen use your local resources, add value. I mean, improve all your major sectors. I mean, redefine your economic structures. I mean, we cannot say that, you know, if not passports, then what? Because it's coming to a point that there may be no more passport sales. So then what? I think we have to really think seriously about the recommendations that Thomson made. Develop our manufacturing, develop our agriculture, our agribusiness, our water industry. You know, we have to do those things. Our energy in the renewable energy industries, we must do that in a way that is going to really give us some really good export-led growth, create a lot of employment for our local people, improve our GDP, and eliminate make us more capable of paying on our debt. Our national debt is increasing at a very high level, as Thomson is reminding us. And if we put ourselves in a position where we no longer have that particular source of revenue, how are we going to repay those debts? It's going to put us in serious problems. Our economy is in danger. So I certainly hope this thing does not end as quickly as I think it might, based on the speed with which I see some of these parliaments are dealing with it. I hope it does not end as quickly as that. I hope we can have at least a year or two, but from some of the reports I'm seeing, I'm not sure that we have as much time as that. So I seriously want to recommend that all the powers that be call everybody, look at all of the talents that we have, bring everybody together, discuss a solution to this problem. We cannot do this as separate units. We have to do this together. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your contributions here tonight. And I just want to thank all our listeners, all the people on Facebook, all the people who called and who did not get a chance to call. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I hope to see you again next week, Tuesday, with another interesting topic. So good night, everybody. Take care and have a good one. And Thomson, especially to you. I hope you get some sleep. Take care, everybody. Lambi, take care, Sherwin. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Good night. Bye, Sherwin.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Good night.